Chapter 6:18. I'm so busy that I'm dizzy. The front gradually approached the battlefield. Soren did not choose to go with the followers of the God of Weeping. Although he did not dislike those who were in the lawful good camp, he did not like to have too much contact with them. This was purely a matter of worldview, but these people could still be used. The most obvious point was that the lawful good camp liked to meddle in other people's business. Many of them could not stand the evil in the world, so Soren revealed some information about the God of the Hunt, Mailer, to them. The God of Weeping and the God of the Hunt had been enemies for thousands of years, to the extent that they had to oppose what the enemy wanted to do. With their way of doing things, if they knew that the followers of the God of the Hunt, Mailer, were holding a bloody sacrificial ceremony, then the Church of the God of Suffering would definitely take action. Not only would they help the innocent, but more importantly, fighting the enemy was also their daily activity. The Church of the God of Suffering hated the two gods the most. One was the God of the Hunt, Mailer, and the other was the Maiden of Pain. These two chaotic and evil gods had a close relationship, and the God of Suffering hated them as much as Mother Earth hated the Lady of Poison. This hostile relationship between the gods even extended to the daughter of Mother Earth, who was now the goddess of agriculture. Soren did not have any real gods that he regarded as an enemy. If he became enemies with the Shadow Lord in the future, his followers' first target would be the Shadow Lord's church. Once this kind of war between gods began, it would be difficult to stop. The hundreds of years of war would lead to the accumulation of hatred and hatred. The War of the Ogres. Soren participated in a legendary battle, although he only participated in the identity of a small mercenary. But it was also the first time he saw the real power of a legendary battle in this world. The power of the Storm Lord gave him a great shock at that time, and also allowed him to gain his first legendary point. This was still the territory of the ogres, but this time the ogres were a little different. Their clan had changed to another clan, the Split Skull clan. More importantly, these ogres were the servants of the ancient Red Dragon. After hiding for so long, the ancient Red Dragon finally showed its claws and teeth. Because it became more and more impatient with the spying of humans and other intelligent creatures, the ancient Red Dragon began to enslave other races as servants to help it solve some small problems. Dragons had a habit of living. Before reaching adulthood, most dragons preferred to be alone with each other. But as time passed, their strength grew stronger and stronger, and the dragons became more confident. They believed that they could control other races, so they began to enslave some servants. Under normal circumstances, dragons would begin to control their servants after they reached their prime. When they reached their old age, they would begin to rely on their servants to manage their caves. These servants included all kinds of creatures, and sometimes even species from other planes. This depended on the strength of the dragon. The ancient Red Dragon naturally had enough confidence to control other species, so it controlled more and more servants. After the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, the Red Dragon even forcibly enslaved other dragons as its mate, but now the creatures under its control should be limited to the nearby wilderness creatures. Through the dense forest, Soren quickly found traces of the ogres. This group of ogres wasn't very strong. They were mainly there to help the Red Dragon fend off adventurers who weren't strong enough, so they wouldn't let small ants disturb its peace. Any dragon that reached the age of the ancient Red Dragon would have much less energy and physical strength than before. They needed a long time to sleep. This was also the reason why someone could sneak into the dragon's treasure house. Soren passed through the territory of the ogres, and there were many traces of gnolls in front of him. There were also many other creatures here, such as lizard men, hill giants, and vampires. It was purely an accident that he found traces of vampires. Soren had always been very sensitive to the smell of blood. When he went to the ancient Red Dragon's lair, he saw a corpse that had been sucked dry of blood. The corpse of a gnoll. In the entire material plane, only vampires would do this, and the ancient Red Dragon was the most powerful and evil of the Pentashade dragons. Most of the dark creatures were under its control. The city of Whiterun had tried to explore this place many times. But in the end, almost no one was able to see the ancient Red Dragon alive. Too few people were sent out and they died in front of the guards. Too many people were sent out, and the creatures enslaved by the ancient Red Dragon easily defeated the army of Whiterun. So far, no one had forced the ancient Red Dragon to fight in person. The legendary wizards of the ogres alone were enough to make them suffer. The ancient Red Dragon's monster level was above level 30. Its challenge rating was above level 24. Against a creature that had almost reached the peak of its power, all the legendary creatures in the wilderness of Whiterun had to bow down to it. Taran. Soren's figure landed on the ground. He looked at the footprints in front of him with an interesting expression. Subterranean creatures. Taurens rarely lived on the surface. They were mostly active in the Underdark. They often appeared in labyrinths, but the dragon would occasionally use them as guards outside the treasure house. There was a passage here that connected to the Underdark. Almost after judging the number of footprints of the Tauren, Soren immediately determined this point. There were not so many Tauren in the surface world. Looking at the number of footprints, there were more than 10 of them. This was definitely from the Underdark. Of course, the ancient red dragon had servants to prepare everything, but the creatures it enslaved still needed to hunt. The Tauren's footprints looked like they came out to hunt, and there were also traces of large creatures being dragged. There were many passages that connected to the Underdark. Soren didn't know many of them, so he secretly paid attention to his surroundings. However, he couldn't find a clear entrance. After passing through the forest in front of him, a towering mountain range appeared in Soren's sight. This was the ancient red dragon's nest, but it wasn't located outside the mountain range. It was located somewhere in the innermost part of the mountain range. It was easy to find. Soren only needed to follow the footprints left behind by other creatures. This mountain range had become the ancient red dragon's private territory. A large number of flying dragon subspecies appeared in his sight. It was certain that they had migrated from other places. Most of them were wyverns. They were a subspecies that originally lived near the swamp, but now more than 10 of their nests had migrated here. No wonder Whiterun hadn't found anything. All 3 sides of the mountain range had been sealed off. Servants were patrolling the area below, and a large number of wyverns were watching the area above. Even the area near Dustwallow Swamp was guarded by lizard men enslaved by the ancient red dragon. Without the strength of a legendary, it was impossible to break into the dragon's nest. Chapter 6:19. Forget it. The previous books have been sealed, so be it. I'm annoyed by the changes, so I'll focus on writing this book. I'll start adding chapters the day after tomorrow. Soren gradually approached the interior of the mountain. Suddenly, he seemed to have felt something and quickly moved in a certain direction. The perception of the gods was very sensitive. They had an amazing ability to sense the elemental energy of the outside world, various magic waves, and even abnormalities in the environment. As soon as Soren entered the interior of the mountain, he immediately felt the abnormality of the energy of the veins. The fire element was too rich and surging. The density of this element was beyond the normal range of the environment. Even when he closed his eyes, he could feel the terrible power of the fire element in the depths of the earth. What happened? Soren's expression became serious and he murmured, "Did history deviate? I don't remember there being such an amazing abnormality here." In the past, Soren rarely paid attention to the ancient red dragon. Although he knew that there was an ancient red dragon here, no one would challenge it for no reason. Therefore, he was not very clear about the situation inside the mountain. The closer he got, the more obvious the abnormality of the fire element became. Soren was almost certain that the ancient red dragon's lair was in front of him, but he did not know what exactly happened. Magma. Soren saw something that did not make sense. It was difficult to see magma in nature because of the environment. Magma would quickly cool down, but the magma in front of him flowed out from the mountain in front of him. The temperature nearby was a little high, and the magma actually gathered into a pool. This doesn't make sense. Soren pressed his palm on the ground and murmured, "This is an active volcano?" That was impossible. There are no volcanoes in this geographical environment. He did not know the reason. An active volcano was born in this mountain. Although it had not completely erupted, Soren finally knew the key to the abnormality of the fire element. This was something that had been artificially created. Therefore, nature rejected the energy here. The gods were also very aware of it. A huge force was brewing inside the mountain. Soren expanded his senses to the limit. He could feel that deep underground, close to the depths of the Underdark, there was a huge amount of fire energy waiting to erupt. If it were to erupt, the terrifying volcanic eruption would engulf an area of several hundred kilometers. Fortunately, there was no city nearby. Otherwise, half of the country would be destroyed. However, if the volcano were to erupt, the nearby creatures would be annihilated. The Dustwallow Swamp and Misty Forest would be severely affected. Is it the doing of that ancient red dragon? Soren couldn't be sure of this, but he was sure that there weren't many creatures in the material plane that had the ability to do this. Other than the gods and saints, there were only a few creatures above level 30 that could do this. Ancient red dragons like to live near volcanoes. There shouldn't be any volcanoes here, but now there was a volcano that was about to erupt. Soren felt that there was a huge secret hidden here, and it might have something to do with the Underdark. because he saw traces of the drows. That's right. Drows. Real drows. Unlike the drows in Mordor who were mixed with the blood of other races, Soren saw pure drows in front of him. So he was not surprised to see a female drow priest with a snake whip whipping another male drow. The other party stood where he was, not daring to move. He allowed the snake-headed whip to strike his back. In just 2 or 3 strikes, his entire back was badly mutilated, looking exceptionally horrifying. Trash. The female drow priest with a rather coquettish appearance but dark skin scolded angrily and roared, "So many people can't even catch a surface elf. What if the matriarch's plan is leaked? Damn it. What's the use of raising trash like you?" Soren approached quietly. He found that these drows were a bit abnormal. They seemed to have slight whitening characteristics, so they were not afraid of the sunlight of the surface world at all. A drow warrior with a cold face bowed his head slightly and said in a deep voice, "Priest. That's a very powerful droll. He's good at tracking and sneaking. We need more elite rangers to find him. But he's still injured, so he shouldn't be able to escape too far. I'll send people to continue looking for him." The female drow priest's chest rose and fell, and she said in a deep voice, "Go. What are you all doing here? Or do you want me to feed you to the lizards?" The other drow warriors immediately moved. They spread out in all directions as if they were looking for a druid in stealth. Did anyone else notice the abnormality here? Soren's figure stood in the shadows. He looked at the drows in front of him, then turned and approached a place. As a god who held the title of Wanderer, it was impossible for these drows to find Soren. Now he had 2 choices. One was to go into the crater to spy on the situation and see what happened. But there should be an ancient red dragon inside, so this was a little risky. The other was to go directly to the droll they were talking about. That droll might know what happened. As long as Soren found him 1 step ahead of them, he could figure out what happened. Tracking. Sneaking. This was Soren's strength. He found some traces almost quickly, and then quickly moved towards the south of the mountain. A little bit of blood. Although it could be covered up, it couldn't escape Soren's eyes. A natural low cave appeared in his sight. It was near a pile of rocks halfway up the mountain. There was a faint sound of breathing inside and there was a faint smell of blood. "Who is it?" Just as Soren approached quietly, a vigilant voice sounded. Surprised. Soren didn't expect that the other party could find him. It seemed that this guy's sneaking ability was really strong. It was a black bear. Soren also saw the corpse of another black bear. He couldn't help curling his lips and looking at the other side with a bit of appreciation. He slowly said, "You killed the black bear in this bear cave? Then you disguised yourself as it and hid? No wonder they couldn't find you. A very good plan." The pressure of a god was this shocking. After seeing that Soren wasn't a drow, the black bear in front of him suddenly turned into a tall and strong middle-aged elf. He already realized the difference between the 2 of them. Soren could easily erase his existence. The middle-aged droll's face was very pale and his aura was very weak. It seemed like his injuries were very serious. He slightly bowed and said, "I wonder who your excellency is?" "I am a droll member of the Dense Fog Forest Council, Burrow Cheetah. There is an elemental anomaly here. I was ordered to investigate the cause of this anomaly, but I never thought that I would meet a drow here. Their matriarch is colluding with a red dragon, as if they are planning a terrifying scheme. Your Excellency, my injuries are very serious. Since you are a human on the surface, you definitely don't want to see the evil creatures of the Underdark succeed. I wonder if you can help me send this information to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council." Very honest. In the face of absolute power, the droll in front of him made a very wise decision. The drow matriarch? Soren couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He looked at the other side and said, "Which drow matriarch? Menzoberranzan City? Shadow City? Or Katnoros City?" The drow matriarch was actually colluding with an ancient red dragon. There was a lot of information in this matter. Even Soren couldn't figure it out because the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, might be behind this. "I don't know." The pale droll in front of him shook his head and said with a hoarse voice, "But there is a drow city under this mountain. There is a passage inside the volcano that directly connects to the Underdark." Entrance? The entrance to the Underdark was inside the volcano? No wonder Soren couldn't find it anywhere. There were clearly creatures of the Underdark here, but Soren couldn't find the passage to the Underdark. The creatures of the Underdark wouldn't appear for no reason. Now he finally understood everything. "All right." Soren didn't think for too long and quickly nodded, "Tell me everything you know. I will pass it on to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council." As a rogue who had lived in the Underdark for a while, Soren was very clear on how serious the conspiracy the Drow matriarch was involved in was. There was definitely the shadow of the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, behind this. Because if the matriarch personally made a move, it was either to please the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, or to complete the oracle of the Queen of Spiders. The Avatar crisis was coming. The Queen of Spiders was the most terrifying and evil hunter. The thing she was plotting would definitely cause terrible destruction. Moreover, her greatest ambition had always been to let the Drows attack the surface. Soren wasn't sure what was hidden here, but since he knew some things he couldn't completely stand by and watch. Making trouble for the Queen of Spiders was good for world peace. Heal serious wounds. With Soren's ability he could cast a Restore spell because he had the ability of a level 20 priest. He could cast most of the divine spells, although it would consume divine power. However, if he did so, his identity as a divine being would be exposed. Therefore he could only pretend that he had activated a piece of high-grade equipment and cast a Heal Serious Wounds divine spell on the other party, accompanied by the brilliance of the divine spell. Drool in front of him was obviously much better. He looked at Soren in surprise and slowly said, "This is what happened." Chapter 620. The wind howled. Soren used Fly and rushed toward the misty forest. He learned the whole story from the Drool. During this time, the chaos near Whiterun had spread far and wide, but because it only affected the humans near Whiterun, neither the elves nor other races paid much attention to it. It wasn't until the Droll Council in the Misty Forest detected the abnormality of the elemental energy in the mountains that it slightly attracted their attention. The Droll Council didn't want to offend a powerful red dragon, so they only sent a high-grade Droll to spy on the situation. This spying was incredible. The Droll found that this place had become an active volcano. This was obviously a man-made volcano, which caused the elemental energy nearby to be abnormal. Burrow Cheetah was a Droll who was proficient in stealth. When he first discovered the creatures in the Underdark, he also felt that something was wrong. So, he went deep into the volcano to spy on the situation, but he didn't expect an even more amazing conspiracy to surface. The bottom of this volcano was directly connected to the Underdark, and he also found a city of Drows nearby. The volcano on the surface world was on top of a volcano in the Underdark. Before he could figure out what was going on, he was then discovered by the elite guards of the Drows. After a chase, he met Soren who happened to come over. There was no doubt. There must be a huge conspiracy hidden in this. A Drow's matriarch and an ancient red dragon colluded together. There was no need to guess that they would never get together for a chat. The misty forest gradually came into view. Soren's figure landed from the sky. There used to be a huge ancient tree here, so the forest was shrouded in some kind of power. In order to avoid exposing his identity, Soren chose to go on the ground. This was the Drool's territory and also the gathering place of the Ents. There was a shepherd guardian here and its level was as high as 36. A level 20 Drool, level 10 shepherd guardian, level 6 nature's guardian. It should still be sleeping now. However, if it were to wake up, even the saints would have to think twice before doing anything to it. The real overseer of the misty forest was the Droll cult. The Ents had a slow perception of time. If no one woke them up, they would probably have to wait until some huge change happened in the misty forest before they woke up from their slumber. Nature God system. The oldest natural gods did not need much faith because they were the embodiment of nature. The Ents were the creations of the natural gods, but they rarely appeared in the outside world. In the past few hundred years, the Ents had almost never left their gathering place. Their slumber was even longer than that of the dragons. "Who is it?" Soren heard the crisp voice of a child coming from behind him. After entering the misty forest, he slowed down his footsteps so that it would be easier for him to find the members of the Droll order. Soren turned around. He raised his eyebrows slightly and stared at the beautiful little thing that was only the size of his palm. He smiled and said, "Flower fairy?" Flower fairies. One of the embodiments of nature. In this world, most of the creatures with spirits were born in nature. They were like monsters in Eastern mythology. Most of the time, they were considered the embodiment of nature's beauty. The flower fairies were the weakest spirits creatures. Compared to the abilities of the water fairies and tree fairies, most of them with a challenge rating of less than 5 were very small. They were only good at some innate spell-like abilities and a small part of their charm ability. The little thing looked at Soren with vigilance and said, "You're trespassing into the territory of nature's spirits. You're not welcome here. Outsider. Get out of here quickly or we'll attack." Buzz buzz buzz. The sound of bees flying was heard. Soren obviously found that there were other flower fairies nearby. These little things were born with the ability to hide. If they did not take the initiative to show themselves, even a very smart rogue would have a hard time finding them. These little things were very exclusive and naughty. Sometimes they would play tricks on other people who entered the forest. Therefore there were legends of fairies in some places. Basically, most of these things were done by the flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies. Naturally, Soren was not afraid. On the contrary, he was afraid of the little thing in front of him. She looked very fierce, but in fact she was very weak. These nature spirits were stronger than ordinary people. They did not have any advantage in front of high-grade professions, so they hid in the deepest part of the forest. I don't mean any harm. Soren looked at the little thing in front of him. He did not have the intention to fight. He slowly said, I'm looking for the drool in the misty forest. I have an important message to tell them. If you don't mind, maybe you can take me to them. There was a saying in the tavern. That was a natural soul-type creature. They were born with +1 luck. Perhaps they were blessed by nature. If someone hurt them, their luck would be lowered by a little. There was no evidence for this saying, but many adventurers believed it. The flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies were very rare. Even if they encountered them, they would avoid conflict. The only thing that was certain was, if you killed a certain number of nature spirits, you would gain a hidden ability, nature's hatred. They were protected by nature. Although the tree fairies were often imprisoned by some powerful legendary figures because of their beautiful appearance, the ones who would actually kill them were very few people with twisted minds. The flower fairies were a companion species. Under normal circumstances, it was very difficult for them to leave their birthplace. As a kind of spirit creature, these nature spirits were more related to the droll. But they trusted the treants the most. They were quite repulsed by any other race, whether it was humans, dwarves, or elves. Their own strength could solve a lot of problems. Although the flower fairies were very repulsed by Soren's identity as a human, because they were afraid of his strength, they still chose to help him find the droll. Most of the droll in the misty forest were of the nature element. There was once a case where a wild droll attacked a bear. So, most of the droll in this faction were very reclusive. It was very difficult to get along with them. Soren didn't plan on increasing their friendliness. His goal was to tell the droll about what had happened. The droll were all stubborn and powerful people. It was fine if they didn't know about this, but if they knew, they would definitely do something about it. The droll order had connections with each other. As long as this connection was connected, Soren wouldn't even need to do anything. The droll would go and cause trouble for the Queen of Spiders. For this kind of thing, Soren was happy to see it happen. Then there was the Silver Moon Council. It was an organization that served the Lady of Silver Moon. It was independent of the Silver Moon Church, and the Moonwalkers were their main members. It was a very powerful force. Soren suddenly remembered something. The death of the ancient red dragon seemed to have something to do with the Lady of Silver Moon. At that time, it was the incarnation of the Holy Spirit that killed the ancient red dragon. Who exactly did it? Soren couldn't be sure because there weren't many witnesses. But now that he thought about it, he realized that the trajectory of history didn't seem to have deviated too much. He just happened to be involved in one of the events. Chapter 621. The Misty Forest. This was a very vast primeval forest. Similar to it was the Lost Forest. Both of these places were places where special creatures lived. Soren's current location was full of ancient trees with intertwined roots. The trunks and branches in front of him formed the shape of a gate. It looked ordinary, but after walking in, it was another world. This place was called the Gate of the Forest. It was a gift left by the nature gods. It was also a world cultivated by the Ents. In other words, this place was an independent half-plane. It was a special half-plane built on the material plane and connected to the elemental plane with the misty forest as its foundation. This place was close to the center of the misty forest. The surrounding fog would affect the minds of others, and even make high-grade professions hallucinate. Usually, very few people could come here. This time, Soren also came here to see if he could get some special benefits. The Gate of the Forest was a special half-plane. Its existence was based on the roots of a huge ancient tree. The ancient tree of unknown age had died, but the roots still retained a huge amount of power. That was why the nature protector had turned this place into an independent demi-plane. Even the wild droll had to get the collective consent of the high-grade members of the council before he could enter. Because this was the place where many Ents slept, there was a great secret hidden inside the Gate of the Forest. This place was a large legendary level dungeon. The so-called dungeon was actually called by adventurers. There were many things in this world that couldn't be replicated. The concept of dungeon was just a joke. There were very few recorded dungeons. Basically, the level of the team challenge was above level 15. Moreover, most of the places that could be called dungeons were independent half-planes. For example, the city of Motor that Soren was now ruling, as well as the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane, the War Chest half-plane, the Secret Laboratory, and so on. These places were almost all legendary level dungeons. The Jungle Gate hadn't mutated yet. After the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, many places had been irreparably damaged because of the huge energy fluctuations. The Battle of the Gods had caused the material plane to be riddled with holes. Therefore, the Jungle Gate would undergo some terrible upheaval in the future, so that the Ents here were affected by the violent power. The raging fire from the Bator Inferno affected the Ents' minds, making them hate those who destroyed nature. In the future, the entire Misty Forest would become a dangerous zone with a challenge rating of more than 12. Of course, it was still relatively peaceful here. The forest gate had not been destroyed, and the structure of the half-plane was still very stable. This was one of the reasons why Soren came here personally. He wanted to sneak into the gate of the jungle. They looked a bit like elves wearing beautiful red, yellow, and green dresses. At this moment they were playing by the river. Their graceful bodies were filled with an indescribable charm. That's one of the residents of the Gate of the Jungle. If the war had not spread here, then most of the Ents here had not died, so this should be the place where most of the Ents lived in the material plane. They were the companions of the ancient trees, beautiful children born of nature. The Ents could not leave their companions for too long, so the ancient trees that they relied on should be nearby. Soren quietly watched for a while, and did not disturb these beautiful Ents. Instead, he continued to go deeper into the Gate of the Jungle along the river. In the deepest part of this place, it was the place where the guardians of nature slept. There was a special pool left from ancient times, and the essence of life would be born in it. The outside world was used to calling it the Water of Life. This was Soren's goal. It was a special item that could permanently increase one's lifespan, and an additional 1 point of constitution. Soren's constitution was now 24 points. As his profession level increased, it became harder to obtain attribute points. If he could get the Water of Life in advance, then he could directly obtain the ability of Epic Constitution. Moreover, lifespan and eternal youth may be nothing to the gods, but for other creatures, it was priceless. As the incarnation of the gods, the only thing that could threaten Soren here was the powerful guardians of nature. Chapter 622. The Oak Sage had a wide range of perception. In fact, many of these nature guardians had dug their roots deep into the ground. The entire half-bit wall had a direct connection with them. It was like a kingdom managed by them. The nature guardians here had the same ability as the tower spirit of the war chest bit wall, number 13. If Soren just sneaked in, it would be better, but if there was a battle or destruction of the environment, then the ancient tree guardians here could easily find his traces. Tree spirits, flower spirits, water spirits. Soren saw many beautiful figures here. They lived quietly in this paradise, almost living a carefree life. But all this would not last for long. The devils of the Bator Inferno and the demons of the Abyss have always liked these natural souls because they were the embodiment of the beauty of nature. They only needed to slightly distort the power of the soul, and the power of these natural souls could be more useful. The most basic point was that whether it was flower spirits, water spirits, tree spirits, etc., the high-grade devils of the Bator Inferno and the high-grade demons of the Abyss could easily turn them into lustful demons and succubus. This kind of transformation was quite cheap. Because the two had a very high compatibility in soul, it only took a little bit of power to turn them into lustful demons and succubus. So after the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, the Jungle Gate was destroyed and became an independent world. There were still a certain number of lustful demons and succubus wandering here. These were the remaining souls that were distorted and transformed. One was the beauty of kindness, the other was the beauty of evil. Soren didn't want to change anything, and he didn't have the ability to change the world. The outbreak of the Avatar Crisis was destined to be unstoppable. He was lucky to be able to protect Mordor City after the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis. The closer he got to the inside of the Jungle Gate, the taller the trees became. Here were all ancient trees of war, which were basically oak. After they were activated, their combat power was far greater than others. Rumbling footsteps could be heard. A giant maple tree appeared in Soren's line of sight. It seemed to be about 20 meters tall, and there were traces of a human on its body. It walked slowly through the dense forest, carefully paying attention to the saplings under its feet. From time to time, it would stop and whisper something in the ancient and slow language of the Treants. It held a special tool in its hand and occasionally sprinkled a drop of water. Then, a big tree would grow crazily and take root in the depths of the earth at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the legendary water of vitality. It was a special item created by the wise one of the ancient trees. Its effect was not as exaggerated as the water of life, but it could be used to heal injuries and accelerate the growth of the ancient trees. The water of vitality was a rare item that was relatively easy to obtain. The wise maple tree walked for about a few hundred meters. Then, it seemed to have discovered something. It stopped in front of a tall oak tree. As if it felt some kind of power, it poured all the water of vitality on the oak tree. Then, many roots grew out of the oak tree and its whole body became bigger and bigger. A smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the maple tree sage. He said in a gentle and slow voice, "Slow down. Slow down. Don't rush. Take root in the earth. Deeper. Even deeper." A low incantation could be heard. The wise maple tree sage in front of him was casting a spell. There was a spell in the wizard school that could only be cast by high-grade wizards and above. At this moment, the spell cast by the wise maple tree was the tree sage. It was a legendary creature that took on the role of tree shepherd. This was its daily activity. As an ancient tree ant, they were almost aloof from worldly affairs. Their daily task was to cultivate the forest, and then choose the ancient trees with enough vitality and vitality. With the help of the tree sage spell, they slowly turned them into new tree ants. They had been doing this kind of work for thousands of years. So in this kingdom, there were more than 2 digits of legendary ancient trees and tens of thousands of tree ants with a challenge rating of 5 and above. Only the army of the Bottomless Abyss and the Bator Inferno had the ability to destroy such a kingdom. The tree sage succeeded. The oak tree in front of him had the outline of a human. It moved slowly and then fell into a deep sleep again. The tree ants were rarely active. Even if they were part of the ancient tree guardians, they would still grow like trees. As time passed, their strength would gradually increase. This process might be slow, but it had already been going on for a long time. The wise maple tree had completed its task for today. The birth of a tree ant was not easy. Even if it was a legendary creature, it could only cultivate one tree ant at a time. The wise maple tree came to a high slope. Then it stuck its roots into the ground and its whole shape changed. In the end, it turned into a huge ancient tree. It needed to rest. The water of vitality was the essence of nature that it cultivated. Only with enough water of vitality could it complete its task of cultivating an ancient tree. Soren's target was not the water of vitality. He carefully sneaked in from the side. The nearby forest was guarded by this maple tree sage, and the entire gate of the jungle was divided into its own territory. Every region was guarded by a legendary level tree shepherd. Soren followed the path according to his memory. On the way he saw a golden oak tree. It was a nature's guardian. The Trent's highest profession. Nature's guardians were basically high-grade legendary creatures. Their profession could reach level 25 or higher. Most of the nature's guardians were promoted from drool to treant shepherds, and then from treant shepherds to nature's guardians. They had the power to control trees. Any plant was their weapon. When needed, they could awaken the entire forest. As he got closer, Soren could feel a strong presence of life. This was a very ancient power. There were only a few places in the universe that could produce the water of vitality. The jungle gate in front of him was one of the 2 places in the material plane. The ancient tree guardians. Inside the jungle gate, there were more and more ancient tree guardians. If it wasn't for Soren's proficiency in stealth, he would have had to fight countless battles. The treants did not allow other creatures to come close. I feel it. Soren couldn't help but slow down. He sensed the traces of life around him. The thing he wanted should be right in front of him. Such a strong presence of life could not be concealed. There was a huge root on the ground, but there was no matching tree in front of him. Judging from the size of the root, an ancient tree that could produce such a large root would be at least 10,000 meters tall. It was as tall as the Himalayas. This was something left behind from ancient times. The water of vitality that Soren needed was right in front of the root. There was a pool that could produce the purest essence of life. Chapter 6:23. The closer he got to the inside of the jungle gate, the more luxuriant the trees around him became. Soren even saw some oaks and maples with golden leaves. These ancient trees had existed for a long time. They were all hundreds of meters tall, and their branches and leaves were quite lush. Judging from the perception of the gods, these ancient gods had a strong breath of life. This meant that they were all animated tree ants, and there was no lack of ancient tree-wise ones whose strength was close to the legendary level. They were the real guards inside the gate of the jungle. Even a legendary-level adventurer team would not be able to break through their defense line. There was a special layer of security here. Under normal circumstances, even Soren would have a hard time breaking through, but he had a piece of equipment that was almost divine for rogues. That was the anti-detection cloak. There was a defensive enchantment set up by the guardians of nature here. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or trying to sneak close, all would be discovered by them. The biggest function of the anti-detection cloak was to avoid any detection spells. This was also the reason why Soren dared to come here. Otherwise, even if he was a saint, it was unlikely that he could escape safely from the siege of a large group of legendary ents. Shadow Realm. Shadow Leap. As he got closer to the warning circle of the ancient trees, Soren chose the safest way to enter. His figure instantly escaped into the shadow plane, and then with the help of the power of space, he jumped over the range of the spell and directly appeared in the shadow of the rock more than 100 meters away. This was the power that legendary rogues relied on to come and go without a trace. A huge root appeared in front of him. Soren reached out and pressed on it. He could feel the life essence slowly flowing away. The speed of the loss was not very fast, but the life essence it had was too large. Even after thousands of years, the life essence that flowed away not only gave birth to the jungle gate, but also continued to nourish the entire space. It was like the oldest demon corpse of Orbis in the bottomless abyss. Some huge corpses still existed in some places in the bottomless abyss. Just the exposed part was like a mountain. They were on the same level as the huge ancient god corpses floating in the astral plane. A golden oak tree appeared in front of him. Soren could sense that this was a powerful nature's protector. He only had 1 or 2 seconds to steal the water of life. If he took any longer, the nature's protector would seal off the space around him. By then, even Soren would not be able to escape. Get it and run. There was only one way for Soren to leave this demi-plane unscathed, and that was to use the power of the Shadow Realm to travel to the Shadow Realm, and then return to the material plane from there. This way, Soren wouldn't have to worry about being discovered even if the other party was a high-tier legendary guardian of nature. There was only one chance. Soren couldn't help but take a deep breath. His gaze locked onto a special pool in front of the roots of the ancient tree. It was a bit like the reincarnation pool of the Bator Inferno, but it was filled with pure positive energy. Shadow Leap. Soren's figure rushed forward and crossed the space in an instant. He appeared next to the pool in an instant, and then took away a lot of water of life in the blink of an eye. The whole pool was suddenly reduced by about a third. Thief. An angry roar sounded. The golden oak tree sage woke up in an instant. Its huge body stood up, and with a powerful force raging, the surrounding space suddenly showed signs of being sealed off. Dimensional Lock. A near-legendary spell, almost without any casting action, the other party directly completed it. However, at this time, Soren had already noticed that something was wrong. He didn't greedily take a drop of water of life. Instead, he instantly activated the power of the Shadow Realm and directly crossed the space barrier into the Shadow Realm. The moment before he left, he felt a lot of powerful breaths burst out from all over the jungle gate. Towering trees stood up, and at least a dozen legendary ancient tree guardians locked onto this place. Damn thief. The angry roar echoed over the jungle gate, but at this time, there was no trace of Soren. He only appeared for less than a second from beginning to end. Even these powerful legendary ancient trees didn't find any trace of him, and they didn't even see his appearance clearly. Killing one person in 10 steps, leaving no trace for 1,000 miles. This was Soren's favorite sentence, but if a rogue wanted to do this, they had to reach the legendary realm. Everything in front of him was gray. Soren's figure appeared somewhere in the Shadow Realm. He wasn't very clear about where he was because the situation at the time was too dangerous. He was completely teleported here randomly. But it didn't matter. He could still return to the material plane through the Shadow Realm, and then it would be easy to determine the direction. Of course, he couldn't directly return to the material plane now because the Shadow Realm was connected to the material plane. If he returned to the material plane from here, he would probably appear directly in the misty forest. Now that he had stolen the water of life of the ancient ents, it would be terrible if he returned to the misty forest. Soren was going to set off from here, go along a direction for dozens of kilometers, and then teleport back to the material plane. In this way he would basically be out of the range of the misty forest. As long as he wasn't in the misty forest, those ancient trees couldn't do anything to him. Wisps of fog surrounded the area. It was impossible to determine the specific relationship between the material plane and the Shadow Realm, But what Soren saw now was also a dense forest. The trees growing in this forest were like reflections. They had twisted roots and there was not even a trace of green. All that could be seen was a gray color. The trees in the Shadow Realm were also gray. There were many creatures in the Shadow Realm that mortals didn't know. Soren saw a twisted shadow, and it quickly targeted Soren. Arcane Missile. An arcane missile directly took away the twisted shadow in front of him. They were souls that were accidentally reincarnated in the Shadow Realm, like twisted petitioners in the bottomless abyss. The twisted shadow began to retreat. Soren looked around and then flew towards the south. He had to leave the forest first. The Shadow Realm was as big as the material plane. Although it seemed very desolate here, he could still see some creatures. Occasionally, there would be some huge broken walls in sight, which were left behind from ancient times. The fallen gods, the ruins of the Arcane Empire, and the wizards of the Shadow Realm. There were many gods who left temples in the Shadow Realm. The Arcane Empire also developed this realm, so there were many broken buildings here. He walked for hundreds of kilometers. There were few towns in the Shadow Realm. The natives were too scattered, and the population of the entire Shadow Realm was less than 1,000th of the material plane. This was the territory of the Shadow Lord. As a mid-level god, he had a wider influence in the Shadow Realm. At the same time, his kingdom was also somewhere in the Shadow Realm. This was a natural convenience. Although he was also forced to leave his divine kingdom because of the Avatar crisis, he was closer to his divine kingdom than other gods. Shadow Realm. With the distortion of space, Soren returned to the material plane again. In front of him was still a vast forest. He used a flying spell to observe the surroundings and was surprised to find that he was already very close to his destination. This was the territory of the elves. It was near where he was chased by the followers of the god of hunting. It was about 100 kilometers from here to Autumnfall. A long and towering mountain blocked the route, making it difficult for the orcs to reach here. At the same time, it was like a natural barrier that separated the elves from other races. Traditionally, going to the Elven Kingdom could only be done through the forest on the other side, which was hundreds of kilometers more. It's safe. After confirming that there was no danger, Soren took a little rest and began to check the properties of the Water of Life. Chapter 6:24. On the surface, the elixir of life looked very ordinary. It was just some relatively clear water. If one looked closely, they would faintly see a hint of emerald green. In fact, this was just an illusion created by the rich life energy. The Water of Life had a very rich power. It was the best healing treasure in the material plane. However, to completely change a person's physique, it needed a lot of it. The Water of Life had always been used by the Ents to cultivate the ancient Ents. This rich life energy could help speed up the Ents' advancement into Ents and nature's guardians. A row of data appeared in front of him. Item type: Water of Life, Fountain of Youth, Item grade, Special Wonder Item description. The Water of Life has appeared in many special places in the material plane. It is the essence of nature, a treasure produced by heaven and earth. In the Eastern world, it is also called the Fountain of Youth. The ascetics believe that it has the ability to completely purify a person's physique and help them to reach the extraordinary realm. Therefore, the Water of Life is a priceless treasure in the Eastern world. There are very few places in the material plane where the Water of Life can be found. Effect: Restore HP, regrow broken limbs, heal fatal injuries, strengthen physique, eternal youth, extend life. Special Effect 1, Restore HP. 1 milliliter of Water of Life can restore 10 HP. This effect is effective on most living creatures. Special Effect 2, Regrow broken limbs. The Water of Life can regrow broken limbs, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special Effect 3, Heal fatal injuries. The Water of Life can heal fatal injuries, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special Effect 4, Strengthen physique. Drinking more than 1 liter of Water of Life can permanently increase physique by 1 point. Note: this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. This effect can only be triggered once. Special Effect 5, Eternal Youth. The Water of Life can delay the aging of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the Water of Life will greatly slow down the aging speed. Special Effect 6, Extend life. The Water of Life can delay the life of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the Water of Life will greatly increase its life. Note: this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. The Water of Life. As an extremely rare special item, it had 2 special effects that could be triggered, namely physique strengthening and life extension. However, there were prerequisites for these two special effects to be triggered. That was, the user had to be in a fully recovered state. If the user wasn't at full health, the power of the water of life would only be used to heal injuries and would not trigger the effects of enhance physique and extend lifespan. Among them, physique enhancement had the highest requirement. It was extremely difficult to increase any attribute point. In terms of effect, the leaf that Soren had obtained before was rarer. Soren's HP was full, so he only needed to drink 1 liter of water of life. The amount that he had obtained was about 10 liters. If he used all of it to improve his physique, it would be enough to permanently increase the physique of 10 people by 1 point. Moreover, the effects of eternal youth and life extension would be triggered at the same time. The taste was light and a little sweet. Soren drank just the right amount, and a row of data popped up in front of his eyes. At the same time, a rich life force flowed into his limbs and bones. Use the special item, Water of Life. Triggered effect, physique strengthening. Permanent increase in physique by 1 point. Triggered effect, eternal youth. Appearance will not continue to age. Triggered effect, life extension. Lifespan will be greatly increased. Physique has reached 25 points. You have automatically mastered the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have the basic ability, Strengthen. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Epic Strengthen. You have acquired the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Damage Reduction. Ability Upgrade. Regeneration, Intermediate, upgraded to Advanced. Finally, there was the third attribute that had increased to 25 points. For a long time, Soren's attributes were far superior to others. However, this advantage did not have much of an advantage when facing the saints who were the incarnations of gods. This was because many of the incarnations of gods had an average attribute of more than 20 points. Some of the gods with great divine power even had an average attribute of more than 25 points. The life force of a saint was very tenacious. Soren's current life force was 385 points. For mortals and other legends, this was quite a terrifying amount of life force. However, for a saint who was the incarnation of a god, it was only at an ordinary level. Some of the warrior-type gods had a terrifying life force of more than 1,000 points. Under normal circumstances, Soren's life force had to exceed the level of an adult dragon to gain a certain advantage when fighting against other gods. Epic Physique, Legendary Ability. Your physique has far exceeded the range of a human. When you receive any damage, you will receive an additional point of damage reduction. Your test of endurance will permanently increase by 3 points. At the same time, you will receive an additional 10 points of HP. When you receive any test related to physique, you will receive an additional point of epic value. The information of the 2 legendary abilities. After Soren increased his physique to 25 points, his accumulated endurance had surpassed most of the adult dragons. The strengthening of the regeneration ability did not have much of an effect on him now. Because of his saint form, he could use divine power to cast healing spells and heal his own injuries. However, the basic passive ability upgrade was still useful. Epic Strength. This was a very important survival ability. Every upgrade would increase his life force by an additional 30 points. Soren did not have much of an understanding of it yet. However, in the future he might be able to use the ability points to directly obtain it. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to use a physique purification ritual on gods. Otherwise, Soren could use a physique purification ritual to increase his life force according to his current attribute points. Then, the increase in his survivability would be very huge. Along the way, Soren's original attributes gained less life force when he leveled up his profession. The ritual would allow him to recalculate his life force according to his current physique and maximize the potential of his body. If he could find the materials to perform the bloodline purification ritual. Then Soren's level 7 rogue, level 10 shadow dancer, level 10 wizard, and level 1 arcanist would be recalculated according to his 25 points of physique and the basic life force added by his profession. The bloodline ability of his body would be purified to the highest possible level. This ritual was very difficult. So far, Soren had only accidentally performed it once with the help of the dragon's blood. His goal was achieved. Soren gained 3 additional abilities. They were the legendary ability Epic Physique, the special abilities Eternal Youth, and Life Extension. These 2 abilities appeared in the passive abilities. Unfortunately, these abilities were useless to Soren, who was already a god. He was almost immortal, so these two abilities were more useful to mortals. He carefully put away the water of life. After gaining an additional point of physique, the water of life was less useful to him. However, it was still a priceless treasure to others. First of all, Vivian would definitely need it, but now he didn't know if he could give it to her. Soren was worried that she wouldn't grow up after drinking it. Then there was Gloria. The divination and prophecy abilities of the northern witches were the most harmful to their own lifespan. In theory, she was the one who needed it the most. As one of his closest women, Soren must leave enough for her. Then there was the portion reserved for the fallen witch and Princess Anna, and the portion that might be needed to make friends with the Princess Royal and the Eye of the North. In this way, Soren found that it was not enough. Because it was not easy to get this thing again, and there was not much stock in the entire material plane. If he wanted to go back and get some more, he would have to wait until the Avatar Crisis. Chapter 625. It would not be easy to fight against the god of the hunt, Malor. There were no allies in this world for no reason. With the water of life in his hands, Soren was more confident in asking the Princess Royal for help. But all of this still depended on his next plan. He had prepared a lot of things to deal with the god of the hunt, even including some things that he had to pay a price for. Before he really carried out the plan, Soren still had a very important thing to do, and that was to go to the Gobi Desert to meet some people. The attitude of these people was the key to all of Soren's next plans. If they were willing to help Soren, then Soren would not have to use the backup plan. But if they were not willing to help, then Soren could only rely on the backup plan to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. These people were the Paladins. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the Paladins was very complicated. As a member of the Order faction, Soren was very appreciative of the Paladins' behavior in maintaining order. But because good and evil were the opposite of each other, Soren had a fierce contradiction with the Paladins in the way of doing things For a long time, Soren had always avoided any obvious conflict with the Paladins, and even helped them several times. For example, he told them where the core material of the Holy Avenger was. And when he fought against the demigod vampire, although Soren's purpose was to get rid of a dangerous enemy once and for all, it was undeniable that he also saved the lives of the Paladins. This time, Soren went to the Gobi Desert to meet them. From here, through the elven forest, he could quickly reach their place of cultivation by following the trade route of the east. Soren needed to meet them and test the Paladins' attitude towards him, and then consider a small request. This small request was to borrow the Holy Avenger. That's right. Soren wanted to use the power of the Holy Avenger to get rid of the god of the hunt, Malor. As one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane, the Holy Avenger completely crushed all of Soren's equipment in all aspects. However, this weapon was not something he could possess. If anyone who wasn't a paladin took possession of this weapon, they would attract endless trouble. Soren could use the Holy Avenger. Even though the process was a little painful and the damage to his mind was severe, it was undeniable that Soren could use the Holy Avenger to last through the entire battle with omnipotent hands. When fighting against the demigod vampire, this most powerful weapon in the material plane had already proved its power. Therefore, when Soren decided to deal with Malor, the god of the hunt, he immediately thought of this weapon. If he could use the Holy Avenger in battle, Soren's chances of victory would increase by at least 20%. This weapon could be said to have a unique advantage against Malor, the god of the hunt from the chaotic evil faction. With its high damage output and Soren's explosive power, if he could get the help of other strong players, he might be able to achieve the same level of dominance as he did in the previous battle. With the Holy Avenger in hand, Soren's reservation plan could be reduced by half. He might not even have to try to provoke conflicts between the god of the hunt and other gods. He just needed to avoid being besieged by the followers of the Church of the Hunt and find an opportunity to kill the god of the hunt. However, Soren couldn't figure out the paladin's attitude towards him, and he wasn't sure if they were willing to lend him this most important holy object. Therefore, he secretly provoked a conflict between the Church of the Hunt and the Church of the Suffering in advance. Wind and sand filled the sky. Soren's figure appeared outside the Gobi Desert. Because the Avatar Crisis was coming, the route to the Eastern Kingdom had become very dangerous. The terrible climate change had buried many passing merchants, so not many people passed through the Desert of Death for the time being. The secret base of the Paladins couldn't be easily approached. If Soren encountered some idiot who cast a spell to detect his alignment, then things would be very awkward. Then do you still want to borrow the Holy Avenger? Don't attack? What if the other party was stubborn enough to attack Soren, this evil guy? So, The wisest choice was to first find someone Soren had met before, so as to avoid a direct conflict. The paladins also knew how to be polite. If there was such a person who had contact with Soren in advance, the other paladins should not cast a spell to detect his alignment. In terms of flexibility, these paladins who lived in seclusion near the Gobi Desert were much easier to get along with than those of the Church of Glory. Those paladins couldn't tolerate sand in their eyes. Who should he find? The ideal target was naturally the prison warden, who had a high status within the paladin organization. However, Soren wasn't familiar with him, so his first target should be the young paladin he saw in the City of Wealth. If he could get in touch with the Holy Avenger through him, and then find a way or even pay some price to borrow the weapon, then the next thing would be much easier. Find someone. This was a bit of a troublesome problem. However, the channel Soren could mobilize now was not what it used to be, and he soon learned the whereabouts of the paladins. Arendelle. Since they had obtained an important part of the Holy Avenger, the most important thing for the paladins now was naturally to repair this weapon. However, there were very few people in the entire material plane who could repair this weapon. One of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane, this was not a joke. Even the most skilled blacksmiths in the human kingdom couldn't repair the Holy Avenger even a little bit. Because this weapon was an artifact, there were remnants of great divine power on it. In other words, one must reach the level of being able to use divine power to repair this weapon. Looking at the entire material plane, there were very few people who could do this. Not only did they have to be able to use divine power, but they also had to be very skilled in magical weapons. There were only a few people who could do this. Arendelle's Princess Royal. There was no doubt that Princess Royal was very powerful as a divine warlock. At the same time, she was also the only person in the north who could easily use divine power. Secondly, Princess Royal was an advanced legendary spellcaster, so she had a very high understanding of alchemy and enchantment. The part found in the Underdark was Tyr's Eye. This thing was also an artifact-level material, and it wasn't something that could be casually embedded into it. The complicated process involved, as well as the price one had to pay, was enough to make anyone think twice before doing it. If he wanted to restore an incomplete artifact to its peak state, the amount of divine power needed to be consumed was enough to make Soren's teeth ache. So, unsurprisingly, the paladin's progress in repairing the Holy Avenger did not have any progress, because Arendelle's Princess Royal was not willing to waste her precious divine power to help them. Therefore, the matter had been delayed until now. Chapter 626. The gentle evening breeze blew in his face. In the slums near the port of Arendelle, a group of half-grown children were gathered together. The sound of a sailor's horn came from the seaside, but the children didn't care at all. They gathered in a circle and focused on the front. From time to time, someone stood on the other side and imitated, posing a posture that was a bit like the sword form, horizontal slash. They were secretly learning combat skills. For these children who lived at the bottom, they didn't have much ambition. Their parents encouraged them to come here more in the hope that they could secretly learn something so that they wouldn't be bullied when they worked at the docks in the future. It was always good to know a few moves. On the other side of the slums was a cheap hotel with a shed for mules and horses on the side. The air was a little muddy, and the road outside was not muddy because of the prosperity of Arendelle, but it was inevitable that water would accumulate when it rained. This was the poorest area of Arendelle, but the people living here were not sallow and emaciated. At most they were dressed shabbily. The paladins lived here for the time being. As representatives of the lawful good camp, many of them refused to enjoy life and firmly believed in their own dogma. Therefore, the paladins refused the accommodations arranged by the court of Arendelle and chose a cheap hotel, because although they held great power, they were not a wealthy group. A young paladin was teaching a half-grown child. There were other paladins watching nearby. His name was no longer important. Since leaving the City of Wealth, his beliefs had been tempered too much. Now he was the user of the Holy Avenger. The paladins called him the Hand of Justice. Although he hadn't fully entered the realm of legends and had his own title, he was now very close to this step. In a very short period of time, he relied on his faith and will to surpass many of his companions. The warden also lived in this somewhat shabby little hotel. In the face of the fearful expression of the innkeeper, his dignified face always showed a smile as much as possible. Pity. Tolerance. Integrity. The paladins had a completely different attitude towards the noble class and the commoners. This attitude was just the opposite of other people. Ordinary people flattered the nobles when they came in contact with them and despised the lower class. Paladins, on the other hand, were the complete opposite. They treated the nobles harshly, but treated the commoners kindly and peacefully. From the perspective of the paladins, most of the nobles were evil, and their rule often made life difficult for ordinary people. All right. Let them practice on their own. Accompany me to Arendel's palace later. We must see the Princess Royal again. The warden nodded slightly to the young paladin. He had witnessed the growth of this young man and watched him find his own path. The young paladin did not fall into a paranoid fanaticism. He firmly believed in justice and had his own understanding, so he finally chose justice, because he believed that justice could make the world better. The training stopped. The young paladin reached out and patted the apprentice's head. He smiled and said a few words, then turned and entered the inn. When he was trained as a saint samurai, he was also a child of this age. Now, so many years had passed in the blink of an eye, and he had touched the door of the legendary realm. Although he had made a vow not to marry and have children, he could not help but feel a trace of fatherly feeling towards this disciple. He was still very young. But his experience had made his face full of vicissitudes, and more of a settled perseverance. He began to understand the older paladins. A group of paladins walked towards the palace. From time to time, people saw them on the road. Ordinary people nodded slightly, merchants looked a little surprised, and even people who wandered in the gray area saw them. At most, they were a little worried and scared and then hid. This was not the city of wealth. This was the richest and most prosperous country in the north of the continent. This was Arendelle, ruled by the Princess Royal. Arendelle also had its gray area. But the commoners here would not choose to ask for help from the paladins, because although their lives were poor, it was not to the point of being unbearable. More often than not, they chose to believe in the laws of Arendelle. The rule of the Princess Royal maintained the clarity of the laws of Arendelle, and there were naturally laws to punish those who were too evil. Ordinary people hardly needed the help of the paladins, and they knew that the price of such help was too heavy. A city. A country. To judge the extent of their civilization, the simplest point was to see if they could accommodate the existence of the paladins. The city of wealth could not do it. But Arendelle did it. Another place that could do this was called Mordor. Although the residents often observed them with indifferent eyes, they still tolerated the appearance of the paladins. The law. The most similar thing between Mordor and Arendelle was that they both had strict laws. The commoners of Arendelle maintained respect for the paladins, and the nobles maintained politeness to the paladins. The former did not regard them as a light of hope, and the latter did not regard them as a threat to themselves. Because under the rule of the Princess Royal, the nobles strictly fulfilled their rights and obligations. They did not think that the paladins needed to judge them. They were just doing what the nobles should do, so they were not afraid of the paladins in their hearts, and naturally there was not so much hostility. Outside the palace, there was no doubt that the warden returned without success again. The Princess Royal had an absolutely noble status in Arendelle. If she did not want to see these paladins, then they could not see her anyway. The warden did not want to give up so easily. He knew that his request was a bit excessive and may cause the Princess Royal's power to be seriously damaged, but he also knew that the Princess Royal was one of the few people in the material plane who could repair the Holy Avenger, so he would never give up easily. Continuous refusal. This made the other younger paladins a little dissatisfied. They believed that repairing the Holy Avenger was a righteous and sacred thing, and the Princess Royal should never refuse such a thing. If it weren't for the prosperity and peace of Arendelle, they would have thought that the Princess Royal did not understand what a righteous cause was. The paladins easily fell into paranoia. Especially when justice filled their minds, fanaticism would cause many things to be seen as unjust. The warden needed to guide them and guide the way for these young people. The Princess Royal was willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a favor, and not willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a duty. You should not use morality to kidnap others, otherwise, you would also be kidnapped by morality. The paladins needed guidance. They were not a bunch of stubborn people from the Church of the Lord of Light, and the warden had always sneered at their education methods. The young paladins always relied on their passion to join their ranks, but only after experiencing various setbacks could they grow into real paladins. He had already guided a hand of justice, and the warden hoped that there would be more young people like this in the future. Because he felt the aura of the coming turmoil. Outside the palace, a carriage team gradually approached, and then a tall and handsome man with blonde hair appeared. He was the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom, and recently he wanted to go to the palace of Arendelle whenever he had nothing to do. The warden had seen him 3 times at the gate because he had always wanted to visit the Princess Royal. As before, the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom looked a little surprised and uneasy when he saw them, and then pretended to pass by from the side as if nothing had happened. This guy did not even dare to pass by in front of the warden. There was no doubt that he was not confident when facing the paladins. Once again they returned without success. The warden could not help but feel a little tired. The Princess Royal had almost nothing to ask of the paladins, and naturally the paladins could not provide anything in return. Power? With the strength of the Princess Royal, there were almost no mortals in the material plane who could defeat her. Well, not to mention whether the paladins had money or not, there were not many people in the entire material plane who could be richer than the Princess Royal. It was estimated that only the ruler of the city of Mordor could be comparable. There was no way to provide anything to the Princess Royal, and naturally the paladins could not ask for anything. Chapter 627. A thin figure shrouded in a grey cloak entered Arendelle. After all, Soren had crossed half of the continent. Even with the power of the gods, he was delayed for a day or two. Taking advantage of the night, he entered the city of Arendelle and was ready to see what the paladins were up to. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the paladins was very complicated. It was not impossible for the two to cooperate, but the possibility was not very high. If there was a choice, Soren would certainly not want to have too much contact with the paladins, but now he had to try. Order evil and order good. In Soren's mind, the truest point was that order was more important than good and evil, and chaos was the real disaster. It was because of this point of view that he would repeatedly help the paladins. As an adventurer who had experienced the most turbulent period of the Avatar crisis and had died once, he had to go through the reincarnation of the Styx and then climbed all the way to the legendary realm. Soren was very clear that the most terrible thing about the Avatar crisis was not the gods fighting, but the complete destruction of the order and rules of many planes and worlds. When the order that had lasted for a long time inside the multiverse was destroyed, the terrible chaos would lead to crazy destructive power that was crazier than all the gods fighting. Soren was a person who advocated order. For him, good and evil were simply two sides of the world. If the devils were to rule the world, they would inevitably use iron and cruel means to control the world and enslave other races. But if the demons were to rule the world, then what would be left in the end would only be a broken ruin. The truest point of Soren's mind was that order was higher than good and evil. Whether it was order evil or order good, in the future after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, they might become his help and allies. The reason was simple. They needed to maintain order in that turbulent period, and only order, whether good or evil, could minimize the damage as much as possible. This was a bold attempt. For Soren, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis was imminent, and it was very necessary to make such a bold attempt. If he succeeded, he might be able to rope in more help in the future. Even if he failed, he would only lose a little time. Considering that he had once helped the Saint Samurai, these people probably wouldn't attack him yet. Chaos would destroy everything. Now, the death rate of the entire continent had increased significantly, and various races had begun to collide fiercely because of the collapse of order. He couldn't feel all of this in Mordor City, but Soren had already noticed it when he went to Amber City and Whiterun City. This kind of turmoil would sooner or later affect the South Coast. In the future, when the terrible era of chaos arrived, any power of order was worth contacting. Port District. It was quite easy to find a group of paladins in a city because they were too conspicuous. Soren only needed to ask a passerby to find out where they were. Under the light of dusk, a young Saint Samurai was teaching a disciple, and next to him were other Saint Samurai. They were wearing slightly mottled and worn armor, and they looked completely different from the Saint Samurai in silver and dazzling armor he saw in the City of Wealth. The latter looked more like the embodiment of light and justice, while the former was like a lonely guardian who had gone through the vicissitudes of life and could only try to maintain justice in the world. This was also an important reason why Soren was willing to get close to them. Holy Avenger. Pale Justice. These two most powerful artifacts in the material plane were weapons that only Saint Samurai could use. It just so happened that the sacred warrior organizations that were in charge of these two divine weapons had surprisingly maintained a peaceful heart. There was a trace of humility and reverence in their hearts. Unlike the sacred warriors of the Church of the Lord of Glory, many of whom were unable to communicate with each other. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, when the young Saint Samurai saw Soren's figure, he was suddenly stunned. He still couldn't see Soren's face, but he remembered the cloak on Soren's body. Long time no see. Soren nodded slightly, and after seeing that the other party didn't have any hostility, he slowly said, "It seems that you've become stronger." I want to see the warden. Even the gods would maintain appropriate respect for high-grade legendary figures. This was true even for his followers. Even after death, such figures would still be valued in the kingdom of God. They would be the most solid foundation of the kingdom of God. Under normal circumstances, if a legendary figure who believed in them died, many times, they would send their own oracles to pick up the soul in person. If the other party's belief was pious enough and could attract the attention of the gods, then it was normal for the gods' incarnations to pick up the soul. Your Excellency, please come with me. The young Saint Samurai might not be young anymore. After all, after so many experiences, his vicissitudes of life could no longer be concealed. He could probably guess Soren's camp. Because justice had become his belief, his perception of the outside world had become more and more obvious. In order to prevent the other Saint Samurai from doing something stupid like throwing a detection camp, he quickly bowed slightly to Soren to show his respect for the person in front of him, and then took him into the hotel. The Saint Samurai around were surprised. After all, the Hand of Justice was also a quasi-legendary figure. Only those who were legendary and above could make him bow to show his respect and call him Your Excellency. Soren seemed to be a rogue. It was well known. Rogues were rarely good people. Rogues like Robin Hood were only exceptions, so they were wise enough not to delve into it. Soren soon met the warden. This powerful legendary Saint Samurai, who had advanced into the legendary class, Judge, was also surprised by Soren's arrival. However, after all, the parts of the Holy Avenger were found through him, so the warden was just surprised and had no other emotions. For a legendary figure to come to him in person, there must be something very important, maybe even related to the Holy Avenger. This was just his personal intuition, because the warden told him where the important part of the Holy Avenger, Eye of Tyr, was. The warden quickly let the others go out, but he left the Hand of Justice here. Obviously he was ready to train him as his successor. I'm here for one thing. Soren looked at the two Saint Samurai in front of him and felt a little pressure in his heart. It was not because of the difference in strength, but because of the identity of the two Saint Samurai. He thought for a moment and was ready to tell the truth, but he had to hide something. So, he went straight to the point and said, I'm going to deal with the god of the hunt, Mailer. Don't ask me why I want to deal with him. He's my enemy and I want to kill him. It's that simple. This was the first sentence and it seemed a little too imposing. The first sentence was to deal with a god, which directly shocked the two in front of him. He thought for a moment. Soren found that he had not yet revealed his identity, so he took off his hood and said the second sentence, I'm Soren. I'm Soren. Just this sentence alone was enough. The legendary rogue who was known by everyone in the material plane, the powerful pirate king who ruled the three seas, built the prosperous city of Mordor single-handedly, and had a high status on the south coast. He was the idol of the rogues and now he had become the faith of many rogues. The reason was simple. He became a god. There were only 4 words in the last paragraph, but the weight of these 4 words seemed to be a bit heavy. Just the sentence, I'm Soren, had already stunned the two Saint Samurai in front of him. They were both legendary figures or close to legendary figures. But there was no doubt that the real legendary figure in the material plane in recent years, the legend of the legends, was undoubtedly Soren, who rose rapidly in Mordor and successfully became a god with the clergy of half-elf and rogue. The body of a god. At this moment, the two Saint Samurai were a little confused. They had no time to think about whether Soren was in the evil camp, because they were now full of one thought, that a god had appeared in front of them in person. My god. I actually saw the body of a god. Chapter 628. Under the dim moonlight. Soren's figure left the inconspicuous hotel. At the moment, it was very quiet outside, and only the barking of dogs could be heard occasionally. He made an agreement with the warden. Although he couldn't understand why Soren could use the Holy Avenger, in order to completely restore the power of this artifact, he decided to make a deal with Soren. The warden was not one of those inflexible paladins. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he quickly became one of the leaders of the paladin organization, the Holy Avenger. As a figure who could rise at such a time as the Avatar crisis, the warden must have something different from other paladins. This could be seen from the other paladins trained by him. These paladins were obviously more rational and calm. The brilliance of the moon was getting dimmer. Just after the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, today's moon suddenly became a little dim. It looked as if it was gray and covered with a shadow. Soren was not sure whether the Lady of Silver Moon had fallen from the sky, but this lady was the core key to the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. She was one of the oldest goddesses and used to be one of the most powerful goddesses. The Lady of Night and the Lady of Silvermoon. One was an evil god with great divine power, and the other was a good god with great divine power. These two goddesses were like the twins of fate, fighting for countless years. The Lady of Night had always wanted to completely defeat the Lady of Silvermoon, and the Lady of Silvermoon also wanted to defeat the Lady of Night. Their struggle could no longer be counted. The great divine power of the goddess of magic came from the battle of these two goddesses. In the most ancient times, the battle of the two goddesses led to the chaos of mysterious energy, and thus the birth of the first generation of the goddess of magic. They were older than Mother Earth because they were the embodiment of the original light and darkness. A lot had happened during this period. For some reason, the Lady of Silvermoon's power declined greatly. At her worst, she was only at the level of minor divine power. However, she was, after all, an ancient and powerful god. Under the protection of the goddess of magic, the Lady of Silvermoon quickly retrieved a part of her power and restored it to the level of lesser divine power. Then, for hundreds of years, she successively intervened in the fields of pregnancy, breastfeeding, motherhood, and so on. Finally, she successfully restored the power of intermediate divine power. The Lady of Silvermoon no longer needed the protection of the goddess of magic, but with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the two goddesses once again collided violently. This must be mentioned because according to Soren's memory, Lillian, the Witch of Dread, died in the hands of the Silvermoon Lady. She was the most ancient deity. It was impossible to calculate the time of its birth. Many legends were too old and it was hard to say whether they were true or not. One thing that Soren could be sure of was that the power of the Lady of Silvermoon would change with the elemental tide. Sometimes the power was very weak and sometimes it was very strong. The goddess of magic was created by the battle between her and the Lady of Night. The battle between the two goddesses produced a mysterious explosion. The Lady of Silvermoon gave up part of her power for the sake of more positive energy, which led to the emergence of the first generation of mages and obtained part of their power. Therefore, the relationship between the goddess of magic and the Lady of Silvermoon had always been very close. This goddess maintained a good relationship with many gods. When she was at her weakest, she once sought the protection of the goddess of love and beauty. She also had a good relationship with the goddess of joy. Now, the representative of the Light Camp, the Lord of Light, had always been her staunch ally. She also had an ally, the Dark Maiden. That was the goddess whose holy emblem was a naked drow girl in the moonlight. She had long fallen in the hands of her mother, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. This goddess also had a close relationship with the Lady of Silvermoon, so the Lady of Silvermoon and the Queen of Spiders also maintained a hostile camp. However, the biggest enemy of the Lady of Silvermoon was still the Lady of Night. She was Lady of the Night, Goddess of the Lost, Goddess of Darkness, and so on. This ancient Lady of the Night was a goddess who liked secrets. She was only intermediate divine power, at her weakest, but because of the last turbulent period she plotted to kill the god of caves in the Underdark and accepted the believers of this god. Then the Lady of Night created the Shadow Weave. Through a series of alliances and secret confrontations with the Queen of Spiders, the Lady of Night and the Queen of Spiders entered the realm of greater divine power at the same time. If there was anyone other than the Queen of Spiders that Soren was afraid of, there was no doubt that the Lady of Night was one of them. This ancient goddess was also very powerful. As mentioned earlier, the cat and dance goddess almost fell into the deepest depths of lust, which led to a serious deviation in her camp. This was the work of the Lady of Night. The Lady of Night rarely appeared in the material plane. Most of the time, she would only appear in those dark dances, communion meetings, and grand dark ceremonies full of tempting lust and lust. The fall of the first generation of the god of thieves led to the fall of the shadow divinity. Although the Mistress of the Night maintained an alliance with the Lord of Shadows on the surface, she was still secretly plotting to kill the Lord of Shadows and reclaim the priesthood of the Shadow Domain. The Avatar crisis broke out. The fall of the goddess of magic led to the return of powerful forces. Before the birth of a new goddess of magic, the two forces that directly led to the birth of the goddess of magic gradually returned to the Lady of Silvermoon and the Lady of Night. So, these two goddesses gradually recovered the great power of the ancient times, and because of the conflict between them, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis became more intense. Everything happened for a reason. Soren had been in this world for so long, and he had thought more than once about whether he could stop the terrible destruction of the Avatar crisis. But when he gradually figured it out, he found that nothing could be stopped in front of the torrent that swept across the multiverse. His weakest personal strength could not change the general trend of the time of troubles. This was not caused by a single factor. Many reasons were concentrated at this moment, and then because of this moment they collectively broke out. These reasons would not break out and they would continue to exist. The outbreak was just because the energy storm ignited everything, providing an opportunity for all the grievances to be resolved. The light dimmed. Suddenly, the silver moon in the sky seemed to have lost its brilliance. Night enveloped the whole world and the sleeping people did not feel anything. But Soren suddenly stopped. He felt that the moonlight in the sky had lost its spirituality, like a gaze that had been watching the world for a long time, and suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Lady of Silver Moon fell. Although it seemed that there was no abnormality, Soren was very sure that the Lady of Silver Moon had fallen to the mortal world. After the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, the second core figure of the Avatar crisis also fell to the mortal world. Soren stood in place for a long time. To be honest, he did not know much about the Lady of Silver Moon, and he did not pay much attention to her at the beginning, mainly because Soren liked to be active in the Underdark and did not know the specific situation of the gods in the surface world. On the contrary, for the gods in the Underdark, especially the old rival of the Lady of Silver Moon, the Lady of the Night, Soren remembered very clearly. If he remembered correctly. The basic profession levels of the Lady of the Night were Rogue 10, Shadow Dancer 10, Assassin 10, Warlock 10, Shadow Lord 10. Health points, 968. There were also believers of the Lady of the Night, in the Underdark. As a god of the same level as the Queen of Spiders, it was difficult for Soren not to remember her information. Moreover, the Lady of the Night also controlled the Shadow Weave, so most people who had been in the underground world would remember her. It was very interesting. This goddess was also an advanced Shadow Dancer, but she had also advanced to Shadow Lord, and her strength was still too terrifying compared to Soren. Chapter 629. The bright white moonlight gradually recovered. However, the light seemed a little hollow. Soren suddenly felt a very powerful vibration from somewhere in Arendelle. This attracted his attention. His figure landed on the roof with a light leap, and then he quickly approached the front. As the distance gradually narrowed, Soren found that the place where the vibration of the divine power came from was actually the palace of Arendelle. On the observatory on the side of the palace, there was a very powerful burst of power. Is it Princess Royal? Soren couldn't help but have a little doubt in his heart, and directly rushed over with Fly. No matter what, Princess Royal was still in an alliance with him. Something must have happened to such a vibration of divine power. Haha. There was a strange chuckle. As soon as Soren approached the palace of Arendelle, Princess Royal found his trace. An incarnation made of ice and snow appeared. She glanced at Soren faintly and said with a little surprise, "It's you?" There was another person present. The royal palace of Arendelle had been set up with powerful security magic by the elder princess. After all, her enemies were not ordinary. The chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Soren recognized the drow priestess with a coquettish face and a long whip at a glance. The other party's identity was too easy to recognize. Only the chosen of the three gods would use that kind of strange whip. One was the priestess of the Queen of Spiders, one was the admirer of the Queen of Succubus, and the last was the chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Princess Royal had always had a hostile relationship with Winter Maiden, and Maiden of Pain happened to have a close relationship with Winter Maiden. That was how the previous dispute had arisen. You dare to come here. Princess Royal's expression was as cold as frost. She stared at the drow priestess in front of her with murderous eyes. With a wave of her hand, ice and snow filled the surroundings. Ice prison. A crisp laughter sounded, and the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared in place, and then appeared 100 meters away. She glanced at Soren with some fear and then said playfully, "It seems that a lot of things have happened to you during this time. I just came here to tell you that Winter Maiden has returned from the astral plane. It won't be long before she comes to see you." "Ah. I won't stay here and disturb you. I'll go first." With a magic aura, the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared. She was afraid of Princess Royal, otherwise she wouldn't run away. Winter Maiden? The Princess Royal couldn't help but frown slightly. She thought of the god that she had exiled to the astral plane. Why did the chosen of the Maiden tell her this? Didn't she maintain an alliance with Winter Maiden? These two evil gods once served the Storm Lord, the powerful god believed in the Amazon region. Later, because the Storm Lord stole the divine power of Winter Maiden, it directly led to the breakdown of this fragile divine relationship. The gods under the Storm Lord began to be disloyal, and Winter Maiden and the Maiden of Pain also formed an alliance. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, God of the Hunt, Sea Goddess and Storm Lord. These 5 gods once belonged to the same divine system. The first 4 gods, whose strength ranged from minor divine power to intermediate divine power, all served the Storm Lord for a period of time. Their alliance was interesting. On the one hand, they maintained cooperation, and on the other hand, they schemed against each other. The evil camp liked this. The Maiden of Pain used to be a member of the Dark Gods, and served the former god of Massacre with the Lady of Poison. That was the bloodline source of the Son of Massacre. But since the death of the god of Massacre in the last turbulent year, these 2 goddesses gradually surrendered to the power of the Lady of the Night. However, after the return of the god of Tyranny, the Maiden of Pain's loyalty to the Lady of the Night began to waver. What happened next was very interesting. The god of Tyranny fell during the Arcane Empire and was replaced by the Dread Lord, the bloodline source of the Son of Fear. The Maiden of Pain's master changed again and became the god of the Storm Lord. The Storm Lord seized the power of Winter Maiden, and the entire divine system collapsed again. The Sea Goddess rose to become a great divine power. The Maiden of Pain, Winter Maiden, and the god of the Hunt formed an alliance, and then the situation continued until now. The relationship between the gods had always been like this. The position of the gods of the evil camp was almost only related to interests. Soren's mind instantly went through the things in his memory. The next moment, he realized one thing in his heart, that was, the Frost Chaos was about to break out. The Avatar Crisis. When this unprecedented period of turmoil broke out, the chaos was not just in 1 or 2 places. When Soren came to the Frost Kingdom through the Icewind Valley, he remembered that the Frost Chaos was about to break out, so he decided to go to the Outer Islands. Now Winter Maiden had returned. The Maiden of Pain's chosen had also appeared in Arendelle. All the signs indicated that the Frost Chaos was likely to be brewing. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, the god of the hunt. For a moment, all the clues in Soren's mind suddenly connected together. He realized something in an instant. That was, if he could kill the god of the hunt and then disintegrate the conspiracy of Winter Maiden and Maiden of Pain, then would the Frost Chaos not break out? If the Frost Chaos did not break out, then the Northern Kingdom centered on Arendelle would not fall into war. In history, this was also a heavily affected area of the Avatar Crisis. If the Princess Royal did not mysteriously disappear, the trajectory of history would be deviated. The turmoil of the Avatar Crisis would be reduced by Soren to some extent. For the first time. This was the first time that Soren felt that he could change the future. Although he could not interfere with the trajectory of the gods above the intermediate divine power, if he could destroy the allies of these weak gods, then the trajectory of the Avatar Crisis would have been deviated. What are you doing here? Princess Royal looked at Soren with a complicated expression. On the one hand, she was very reluctant to Soren's close relationship with Princess Anna. On the other hand, she had to admit that Soren's growth was too amazing. At the beginning he was just an ordinary adventurer. But now he had become a god with the help of the half-elf and the rogue clergy. Although the Princess Royal still had the advantage in terms of strength, Soren's status as a true god was far higher than hers. If it wasn't for the outbreak of the Avatar Crisis, with the ability of Soren as a true god, he would be far more powerful than Princess Royal after switching to the form of a god. No one knew why. Soren had always felt that Princess Royal gave him a lot of pressure, so he looked at her and said slowly, "I have prepared a gift for you. I also have something to discuss with you." Icewind Valley North. As dawn approached, a part of the forest in the south suddenly began to wither, like a plant plague. The roots of the trees rotted away, yellow leaves fell, and the green flowers and plants all withered. In just a short while, the entire forest had died, and the smell of decay permeated the air of the forest. Chapter 630. Withering was spreading like a disease. In the blink of an eye, the forest to the north of Icewind Valley had completely lost its vitality. Along with the light of a spell, a teleportation gate appeared near the Lizardman's swamp. This was a temporary portal. When the portal across space gradually stabilized, figures wearing gray robes appeared one by one. Among these people there were humans, lizard men, and even elves, as well as some creatures made of twisted roots. Their professions were also very different. The one at the front was an elf droll, but unlike the other droll, this droll was full of a rotten aura. Withered. Droll's most corrupt profession, An evil person who spread diseases and withers in nature. Standing in the second position was a human assassin. He had a pale face and the dagger at his waist glowed with a black luster. At a glance, one could tell that it was smeared with terrible poison. The rotten aura spread. From the withered forest in front of them, an old woman with a haggard face walked out. Her face was covered with all kinds of religious tattoos. The soil she walked on also seemed to be infected with the disease, and there was a strange dark green color. She was the Lady of Poison, Lady of Plague, Goddess of Poison and Disease. Because of some reasons in her clergy, she was trapped in a body that used to be very beautiful but was now ravaged by disease and aging. She was a chaotic and evil god. Her greatest pleasure was to spread diseases and plagues, making people fear her name. Her believers included the fallen drool, assassins and doctors. My lord. A group of believers knelt down. The Lady of Poison's old face looked at them coldly, then turned her gaze to the north and said slowly, "Let's leave here first. I have a premonition that something annoying is approaching." The group quickly left. Not long after they left, an eagle's loud cry sounded. It swooped down from the sky and the moment it landed, it turned into a drool covered in feathers. Poison, disease, plague. This is a disaster of nature. We must report to the Earth Walker immediately. The drool turned into an eagle again and flew away. Not long after he left, a tall female elf quickly approached. After she took a look, her face turned pale and hurried to the elf forest. On this day, near the gathering place of races in this area, whether it was humans, elves, or gnolls on the other side of the mountain, people suddenly began to fall ill. The disease was not very serious, but the speed of infection was very fast. Nearly a third of the people in the nearby villages were infected, and nearly half of them had a fever. The doctors were helpless and could only ask the priests of the temple for help. Withered forest. A muddy river flowed from it. Beside the river were many animal corpses. The rotting roots were like ghosts in the shadows. The corpses of these animals had been piled up. There were not many living creatures in the entire forest. Arendelle Royal Palace. When Soren took out the gifts he had prepared for the elder princess and Princess Anna, even the elder princess, who had always been calm, couldn't help but be surprised at the moment. She looked at the clear liquid in front of her and murmured, "Water of life? Fountain of youth?" Legendary spellcasters were very knowledgeable. Princess Royal recognized what it was at a glance, which was why she was so surprised. Yes. Soren nodded slightly and said slowly, "One is for Anna and the other is for you." Princess Royal's expression was slightly stunned, and then she said slowly, "You're very thoughtful. That's rare." She showed a faint smile to Soren, and it seemed that the initial rejection had lessened a lot. As a powerful warlock, Princess Royal's need for the life water was naturally not that high. But for Princess Anna, who did not have her talent, the life water's effect was quite amazing. Princess Anna could use its power to stay young, and at the same time have a lifespan far beyond that of an elf. Soren? Princess Anna, wearing pure white pajamas, appeared in the hall. She trotted to Soren and threw herself into Soren's arms without hesitation. She hung her whole body on Soren's body. Princess Anna's expression at the moment had a hint of joy and a hint of bitterness. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but then she heard a suppressed cough from the side. Then she jumped down from Soren's body like a frightened rabbit and stood obediently behind Princess Royal. Princess Royal's expression suddenly became a little cold again. She looked at Soren as if he had stolen something important from her. Although she was not hostile, she was not very friendly either. She glanced at Princess Anna next to her and said seriously, "I have something very important to discuss with Sir Soren. Go back to your room and sleep first." After hesitating for a moment, Princess Royal handed the life water in her hand to Princess Anna next to her and said softly, "This is his gift to you. The legendary Fountain of Youth." Fountain of Youth? Princess Anna looked at it in surprise. When she looked up at Soren, her eyes were full of tenderness. No woman could resist the temptation of youth. Not to mention that this was given to her by Soren. Even an idiot should know how rare this thing was. Her biggest worry had always been that she was just an ordinary person who would gradually grow old with time, but now her biggest worry had disappeared. If Princess Royal was not here, the girl even wanted to throw herself into Soren's arms and give him a kiss at this moment. But in fact, this was simply impossible because Princess Royal would be very angry, and because it would not be very harmonious. Princess Anna reluctantly left. In her heart, she was still afraid that her sister would be angry. Princess Royal's majesty was not to be offended. Chapter 631. The light of dawn shone on Arendelle. Princess Royal's figure appeared on the astrology platform. At this moment she was wearing a simple blue dress. She looked like an ordinary girl. She didn't have the aura of a superior, but there was a hint of feminine beauty. At this moment her expression seemed a little tired, as if she hadn't slept all night. Now that autumn had arrived, the temperature should be relatively high, but for some reason the air around her was very cold. A layer of autumn frost seemed to have fallen on the astrology platform. This shouldn't have happened. Because everything in front of him meant that Princess Royal's power was a little out of control, and it seemed to have changed the surrounding environment a little bit. She once created an ice fortress out of thin air. With such great magic control skills, it was absolutely impossible for her to be so chaotic that even her own energy overflowed and affected the surrounding air. The power of a god. Princess Royal stood on the astrology platform and looked down at Arendelle in front of her. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She murmured, "What an elusive power." Since the last time she mysteriously disappeared for a while, her power had become more and more powerful. Sometimes, when Princess Anna faced her, she felt as if she was facing a god. But since then, Princess Anna also felt that there was something wrong with her sister. She liked to be alone more and more. Most of the time, she stayed alone on the astrology platform and didn't allow anyone to disturb her. Princess Royal was a little upset at the moment. Not only because of Soren's matter, but also because of her own troubles. During the time when she mysteriously disappeared, she went to another plane. There was a well-planned conspiracy against her. Although she successfully cracked the other party's trick and gained great power, there was another problem. That was, she was still just a mortal. A divine sorcerer could have powerful divine power, but she didn't have any divinity. Even her divinity was only inherited from her bloodline. Princess Royal couldn't absorb divinity and divinity like Soren. The excessive divine power caused her to gradually lose control of her own power. If I had to use a metaphor, the current Princess Royal was like the Witch of Terror Lillian at her peak. Relying on her powerful will, she could still control herself and not be affected by the power. But when it came to controlling the divine power, it was no longer as easy as it used to be. Besides, if the energy was too abundant, it would cause the divine power to overflow. That was why a layer of frost unnaturally condensed around her. Ascension to godhood was imminent. Princess Royal felt that her power was on the verge of going out of control. This was a huge power that mortals could not control. Only by using the template of a deity could she truly control this power. But ascending to godhood was definitely not an easy task. First of all, Princess Royal's divinity might not be enough. Secondly, she had almost no power of divinity. Then, she had not condensed a clergy suitable for herself. As long as the Winter Maiden had not fallen, it would be difficult for her to easily condense a clergy related to ice and snow. The only thing she didn't have to worry about was her divine power points. For some reason, the divine power she had accumulated was even close to the level of a mid-grade divine power deity. The Paladins had always hoped that Princess Royal would help them repair the Holy Avenger. But in this case, how could the Princess Royal help them do such a troublesome thing? Repairing the artifact was an extremely delicate process. Now she could not even gather all her power at ordinary times. It would be even more difficult to repair the Holy Avenger. But these things could never be told to the Paladins, even to Soren. Princess Royal could only hide everything in her heart and silently look for a solution. She was very strong-willed. As the ruler of Arendelle, she would never allow herself to show any weakness in front of others. Maybe it's time to fight her head-on. Princess Royal seemed to have made a decision in her heart. She looked into the distance and whispered, "Only the clergy of ice and snow can match my power. There must be a battle between me and the Winter Maiden. Soren. Maybe I can try to join forces with him. Because of Anna, he should be trustworthy." The Holy Avenger could not be repaired. But it could be considered to help Soren deal with the god of hunting. Soren did not know the power of the Holy Avenger because he was just a half-baked spellcaster. He did not know how much energy it would take to repair the most powerful artifact in the material plane. But Princess Royal was very clear about this. That was, if the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, she would fall into a long period of weakness. With the current chaotic situation on the continent, Arendelle's peace was entirely dependent on her power to deter everyone. If the Princess Royal fell into a long period of weakness, the entire Frost Kingdom would be seriously affected. The Holy Avenger. This was one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane. It had not been repaired yet, but it already had such amazing power. If it was completely repaired, people in the good camp would be eager to get it, and people in the evil camp would be afraid and want to destroy it. In Princess Royal's view, Soren was still a little inconsiderate in this matter. If the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, it was estimated that all the organizations in the evil camp on the continent would feel their hearts skip a beat. Because of their fear of the power of the Holy Avenger, it was hard to say what they would do. This was the same reason why the Flail of Time was broken into parts again and again. This matter might even attract other gods. After all, the last part of the Holy Avenger was the Eye of Tyr. This part came from the previous God of Justice, greater divine power. It was an eyeball that was dug out before he fell. The Holy Avenger in its complete form was a 6th-grade artifact. Even the artifacts in the hands of many gods were not as powerful as it. This thing was a hot potato. Princess Royal had been delaying the paladins because she believed that the Holy Avenger should not be repaired, especially since the attitude of the God of Light and the Church of Justice was still unclear. Ta-ta-ta. A series of hurried footsteps came from outside. Princess Royal immediately frowned because this was a place where she meditated alone. Unless it was a very important matter, no one was allowed to disturb her. Your Majesty. A young and beautiful female official ran up in a panic. She held a document in her hand and said incoherently, "Not good. Plague. A very serious plague has occurred in the south." Plague? Princess Royal's face suddenly turned ugly. She quickly took the document and glanced at it. Her expression immediately became quite solemn. There really was a plague outbreak. What was even more frightening was that the plague this time didn't just infect humans. Even trees and flowers would be infected by the plague. It was close to the autumn harvest season, but all the crops in the south of the Frost Kingdom had withered. This was definitely not a natural disaster. Chapter 632. The news soon reached Soren. Because the plague spread very quickly, not only did it spread to the Frost Kingdom, but it also raged on the edge of the human gathering place in the Elven Forest. This was definitely not a plague that appeared in nature because it was impossible for a natural plague to spread to humans and plants at the same time. Moreover, the speed of the plague this time was so fast that it made people wonder if there was someone secretly manipulating it behind the scenes. Has the Lady of Poison also fallen to the mortal world? Soren looked at the information in his hand and murmured, "Other than the Lady of Poison, there shouldn't be anyone who can spread the plague so quickly." The plague infected the crops. From the edge of the Elven Forest to the periphery of the Frost Kingdom, and then to the south of the Northern Tower, all of them were affected by this terrible plague. All the crops withered overnight. What was even more frightening was that if these infected crops were eaten by people, a new epidemic would soon break out. Many people who were not infected at first were infected because they ate infected animals and plants. The only thing to be thankful for was that although the plague this time was widespread, it did not cause too many casualties. The main reason was that during the infection period the infected people would at most have a fever, but they did not die immediately. This gave time for all parties to react. This world had divine spells, and the priests could quickly treat the plague by relying on the disease removal spell. The only problem was that many people were infected again after being treated. It should be the work of the goddess of pestilence. Soren could not help but think of the god of the hunt, Malor. When the gods first fell to the mortal world they lost most of their power. Therefore the god of the hunt, Malor, caused great turmoil in the south. The hunters constantly used bloody sacrificial rituals to please the god and restore his lost divine power at the same time. The Lady of Poison's behavior should be the same. She spread the plague to make the mortals fearful, because the faith generated by the fear could also restore her lost divine power. The plague was still under control. It was estimated that the Lady of Poison did not dare to offend too many forces at the same time. Otherwise, many churches would unite to deal with her. Arendelle Imperial Palace. At this moment, Princess Royal had regained her former majesty. In front of her was a group of Arendelle's court ministers. She glanced around and ordered in a deep voice, "Seal the passage to Icewind Valley immediately. Order the army to be stationed at Ice River City's Cold Wind Fortress. Before the plague crisis is resolved, no one is allowed to pass through. Mobilize the doctors and priests. Give the order to burn all the crops in the epidemic area. The Arendelle royal family will provide them with aid in the coming winter." Orders were issued one after another. Very soon Arendelle's army was mobilized and directly cut off the passage to Icewind Valley. Currently the plague was only wreaking havoc on the periphery. However, if it were to spread into the city, the disaster would be quite terrifying. Soren was also very cautious about this. He contacted the intelligence network on the south coast almost immediately and ordered everyone to be on their guard. They had to pay close attention to any possible followers of the goddess of pestilence. Now they could only hope that the goddess of pestilence knew when to stop. Otherwise they would have to gang up on her. Harvest City. Almost as soon as the plague appeared in the northern region, the Church of Agriculture was also operating rapidly. Speaking of the hatred between the goddess of pestilence and the goddess of agriculture, it all started from her mother, Mother Earth. This ancient deity had always hated the goddess of pestilence because she would spread terrible diseases in nature, destroying the beautiful natural environment until it was full of holes. After Mother Earth handed over her own priesthood to her daughter, who was now the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of agriculture also inherited the antagonistic relationship with the goddess of pestilence. The two churches had been in conflict for thousands of years, and it was basically a situation where they would fight whenever they met. At this moment, in a magnificent temple, a group of priests who believed in the goddess of agriculture had gathered together. At a glance, almost all of the priests here were bishops, and there were also many who had the strength of legendary. The goddess of agriculture's faith was very widespread. Her church had a rather large droll church. Here, and here. A middle-aged droll with a dignified face pointed at the map in front of him and said in a deep voice, "There are traces of the fallen of the Church of Pestilence's activities here. The goddess has sent an oracle to immediately stop the spread of the plague and at the same time, attack the enemy's strength. I'm afraid that this year's harvest has been affected. I hope that each parish can store food. If there is a famine, the church must immediately provide relief to the victims." Similar scenes were happening all over the place. Basically, the churches that were affected by the plague, whether good or evil, were full of hostility toward the goddess of pestilence. Although she had recovered a lot of power with the help of the plague, it was likely that she had gained a lot of hatred this time. Perhaps she didn't care at all. Because all along, the goddess of pestilence had been feared, hated, and revered by people. Even the gods were a little afraid of her. Because she had inherited a part of the power of the god of decay. The first generation of the goddess of fortune died because of the god of decay, and then the current twin of destiny was born. From then on, the god of decay began to fall to others, and finally, a part of it was inherited by the goddess of pestilence. This goddess, who was good at using poisons, had a large number of assassins as followers, and she had never been at a disadvantage in the mortal world. South of Autumnfall. A strong smell of blood permeated the woods, and many corpses could be seen on the ground. The hunters were harvesting the enemy's lives. "I believe that the Lord will be satisfied with the sacrifice we offer." A one-eyed gnoll showed a grim smile on the corner of his mouth, waving a dagger and cutting the throat of an elf captive in front of him. In front of them there was also an injured black cheetah. This fierce beast was now seriously injured and was easily captured by the hunters. Shadow leopard. A creature born with 25 points of dexterity in adulthood, they were the favorite companions of the elven rangers. "Maybe we should hunt a dragon." A strong ogre came to the side of the one-eyed gnoll. Its eyes had a different light of wisdom from other gnolls. Suddenly, it swung the mace in its hand and roared angrily, "Damn werewolf! That's the dinner I prepared. Don't touch that elf. I'm going to take it back for supper." Chaos had begun to spread. And the first to cause all this was the gods of the chaotic evil camp. Chapter 633. Under the Cold Moonlight. A primitive and wild altar stood in the vicinity of Spiky Ridge Valley. A species rarely seen in other parts of the main road lived here. Steel-haired boar people. The origin of this creature could no longer be explored. It was only known that outside the human kingdom, near the wilderness, many boar people like them lived on the edge of the orcs' territory. These races were basically the same as the gnolls. They lived a life of fishing and hunting, so hunting was an essential part of their daily lives. The belief of Malur, the god of the hunt, was widely spread in this area. It was close to the early hours of the morning. A large number of bonfires were erected near the altar in front of them. The howling of wild boars could be heard faintly, as well as other chaotic sounds. Many evil war-creatures were firm believers of Malur, the god of the hunt. At this moment, a large number of species gathered near the altar. There were humans, orcs, lizardmen, gnolls, and boar people. Many creatures were divided into their own camps near the altar. Because of the racial gap, the relationship between these hunters was not very harmonious even if they believed in the same god. In other words, they rarely gathered together unless it was an important mission. A mournful wolf howl was heard. The gnolls near the altar could not help but look surprised, and some even shrank back in fear. Under the cold moonlight, a tall and burly figure was approaching quickly. It had an appearance similar to a gnoll, but if one looked closely, it was not a gnoll at all. It was a dark creature. It was a werewolf. As a dark species like vampires, the werewolf had talent far beyond ordinary creatures. It looked at the other hunters with scarlet eyes, then slowly walked to the center of the altar. Dark species relied on hunting to survive. Whether it was werewolves or vampires, there was a considerable number of people who believed in Malur, the god of the hunt. The reason was simple. It was not only because of the priesthood that the god of the hunt held, but more importantly, he also had a very special domain. The moon domain. As a chaotic and evil god, the god of the hunt could survive for so long. Naturally, he was not easy to deal with. The Lady of Silver Moon was very weak for a period of time. She even had to rely on the protection of the god of love and beauty and the power of the goddess of magic to survive. It was during this period of time that the god of the hunt used a long time to expand his domain and increase the scope of his believers. He used a long time to expand his domain and he mastered the moon domain. It was because of this. Many dark species had become his believers, especially the werewolves. Many of the dark species believed in him. It was well known. Ever since the god of the hunt, Malur, had mastered the moon domain, the were-creatures had been divided into two factions. One faction maintained their faith in the Silver Moon Lady, while the other shifted to the embrace of the god of the hunt. They believed that the teachings of the god of the hunt were more suitable for the nature of the creatures of the dark world. The sacrifice. The burly werewolf stood at the center of the altar, looking down at the other species as if declaring his unique status. This was a legendary species. Compared to the vampires who liked to mix with humans, many were-creatures loved the wild life. They liked to wander in the wilderness and many of them lived near the territory of the orcs. A dull roar sounded. A high-grade cheetah was carried up, followed by a dragon with its limbs locked, and then a burly orc warrior. One by one the prey was sent to the altar. Almost all of them were high-grade creatures. At this moment they were the prey offered to the god of the hunt. The power of bloody lust would awaken the god of the hunt. Why is there no legendary blood? The were-creature glanced at the prey, frowned, and said in a deep voice, "Are you prepared to offer this trash to my lord?" The god of the hunt loved legendary blood. Even if there were many high-grade creatures in front of him, the were-creature thought that it would be better to offer a legendary creature to win the favor of the god of the hunt. The sacrifice was in progress. Accompanied by the strong smell of blood, the prey were killed one by one. The strong smell of blood gathered on the altar and finally turned into the shadow of a creature with sharp fangs and claws. This was the body of the god of the hunt. One of them looked like a combination of a gorilla and a baboon. Its head was similar to a gnoll's, and its face was blood-red with a ferocious expression. Its ears were shaped like daggers and its body was covered in thick hair. Its four limbs were sturdy and powerful, and there were traces of a tail behind it. The king of beasts. The beast of black blood. The body of the god of the hunt was a beast with high intelligence. It stared at the prey on the altar, and a trace of anger and dissatisfaction appeared in the eyes of the condensed shadow. With a roar, the gnoll who was in the middle of the sacrifice suddenly died on the spot. Whoosh! A large number of hunters knelt on the ground. They prayed with fear and awe, praying that the god of the hunt would not be angry with them. The god of the hunt was very dissatisfied. The burly were-creature seemed to have expected this. Without the legendary blood to offer to the master, such high-grade creatures would be useless no matter how many of them there were. Pray. The shadow of the god of the hunt roared angrily. Suddenly, it turned its eyes to the hillside in the distance and roared, "The prey is there. Catch her. Give her to me. I want her blood." There were enemies nearby. The burly were-creature realized this in an instant. He knelt on one knee toward the distorted shadow of the beast in front of him and said in a deep voice, "My master, Lord Hog Nakma has brought the prey to you." Whoa! With a howl, a few were-creature figures suddenly rushed out of the darkness. The burly were-creature leader leaped over a distance of more than 10 meters and rushed toward the hillside in front. At this time, the other hunters came to their senses and rushed toward the hillside one by one. Under the cold moonlight, a strong and tall figure escaped. She had pointed ears, which represented her identity as an elf. On her back was a silver longbow, and on her waist was a delicate war blade, which meant that she was a brilliant ranger who was proficient in both long-range and close combat. There was a special emblem on her chest, which seemed to be surrounded by stars. This was one of the symbols of the Moonwalkers. She was a member of the Moonwalkers who served the Lady of the Silver Moon. For some reason, she was lurking nearby to observe the bloody sacrifice held by the hunters for the god of the hunt, Malor. Chapter 634. Everything around her was moving backward rapidly. Clarentina Silverblade ran with all her strength, because she knew that if she was a little slower, she would fall into the encirclement of the hunters. Several black shadows were rapidly approaching her from behind. In the vast and desolate wilderness, few creatures could escape the pursuit of werewolves. Clarentina Silverblade quickly realized that it was almost impossible for her to get rid of the other party. According to the current situation, she would be caught up by the enemy in 10 minutes at most. The distance was getting closer little by little. Even as a powerful knight in silver, she was still gradually caught up by the other party. Clarentina Silverblade realized that she might not be able to escape tonight. Ding dong. With a crisp sound, Clarentina Silverblade pulled off the knight in silver emblem on her chest, and then a faint light appeared on it. She threw the emblem into the river in front of her, and then her whole body turned around and rushed into a valley. She had no way to escape. The enemy's footsteps were approaching. Clarentina Silverblade knelt on the ground on one knee. She held the handle of the sword with both hands, closed her eyes and prayed calmly. She knew that this would be the last time she prayed to the Lady of the Silver Moon because the hunters had already regarded her as prey. In this wilderness, she could not get rid of these enemies who had a strong tracking ability, so her expression at the moment was very pious, and she said the last prayer in the ancient elven language. May my faith not be blasphemed by the enemy, may my sword live up to the name of the Silver Moon. May the Silver Lady guide my soul home. Clarentina Silverblade stood up slowly. Her expression was very firm. She looked at the many enemies who were getting closer and closer in the night. She slowly took out the silver-white bow on her back. She was the knight in silver. As the pride of the knight in silver, she would fight to the last moment. The wind was howling. At this moment, the moon seemed to be stained with a trace of blood red. There was a burst of mournful howls in the valley, and a faint smell of blood drifted with the wind. About 10 minutes later, an unusually burly werewolf walked out with the cold corpse of a female elf. There were 3 sharp arrows stuck in its chest, but it didn't care much about the powerful regenerative ability of dark creatures. The abnormally burly werewolf carried the body that was gradually turning cold on its shoulder and quickly approached the altar. There were other hunters behind it, but many of them were unable to walk. In the deathly silent valley, there were many corpses scattered on the ground. There were gnolls, ogres, lizard men, and humans dressed as hunters. Near the edge of the valley, there was a broken silver-white battle bow. There were cracks all over it as if its owner had used it more than once to block attacks. Not far away, there were broken pieces of exquisite armor stained with blood, and half of an elven battle blade that had been broken by brute force. The valley was deathly silent. Everything seemed to have quieted down. Only the corpse that the hunters had taken away was gradually turning cold. Fresh blood was dripping down from the pale fingertips. It was unknown how much time had passed. Near dawn, a vigorous figure rushed from the forest in the distance. She rushed directly to the river in front of her and then jumped in with a splash. In the mud of the river, she found a special silver-white emblem. A drop of crystal tear fell. The beautiful elf slowly stood up. She followed the traces on the ground and soon found the valley full of traces of battle. Clarentina. My sister. We will avenge you. Anyone who kills the knight in silver must pay the price. The female elf in front of her slowly knelt on one knee, put away the broken silver-white battle bow on the ground, and then pulled out half of the elven battle blade that had been cut off. Her eyes were full of anger and hatred. She turned and flew in the direction of the autumn leaf forest. Arendelle Royal Palace. After spending nearly 3 days, Soren finally reached an agreement with the Princess Royal. In the end, the matter of repairing the Holy Avenger did not come to an agreement. For some reason that Soren did not know, the Princess Royal had always refused to help the paladins to repair this artifact. However, to Soren's surprise, just when he thought that it was impossible for him to borrow the Holy Avenger, the warden suddenly agreed to lend it to Soren. But this required Soren to swear in his own name that he would never want to take this weapon for himself. At the same time, he would immediately return it to the paladins after borrowing it. A god swearing in his own name would have a strong binding force. If Soren made this oath, then he would never try to take over the Holy Avenger. Otherwise he would have to pay a great price. The paladins were also worried about something. In their view, Soren was a person who was both good and evil. In terms of behavior, Soren was definitely evil. However, from the prosperity and stability of Mordor to the prosperity of the south coast, Soren had done many things that surprised the paladins. This result and request were obviously discussed internally by the paladins. They were probably worried that Soren would take over the Holy Avenger in other ways. It was the first time they met someone who could use the Holy Avenger other than the paladins. However, considering Soren's identity as a god, they forced themselves to accept this. They just didn't know if other gods could use this artifact. They couldn't help but feel worried when they thought of this. During this time, Soren was paying attention to the spread of the plague on one hand, and on the other hand he was also paying attention to the movements of the god of the hunt, Malor. But today the intelligence organization of Mordor City suddenly sent him a very strange message through magic. That was, the figure of the knight in silver had appeared frequently in that area. Soren himself had the title of rogue, so he still had a lot of rogues under his command. The news that came was quite strange. He didn't know why the knight in silver had recently fought with the followers of the god of the hunt. Several head-on conflicts had broken out between them. Another strange movement was that the Church of the Silver Moon seemed to be mobilizing people near Autumnfall. The Lady of the Silver Moon was a very powerful god. Although her power was always very unstable, her beliefs were spread across many races such as humans, elves, beastmen, and so on. She was the only god who did not belong to the elven divine system, but had a wide range of beliefs among the elves. Now the Church of the Silver Moon was also showing signs of activity in that area, which made Soren feel very strange. Did the Lady of the Silver Moon also want to deal with the god of the hunt? Was she trying to steal my kill? Chapter 635. There is one more update today. Because of the appearance of the knight in silver, Soren had to check the information of the Silver Lady. At present, it was still impossible to determine where the Silver Moon Lady was, but it was certain that she had now established contact with her church. Otherwise, the Silver Moon Church would not have made so many moves recently. If a god fell to the mortal world, they would generally contact their church first. After all, this was their main force in the mortal world. The arrival of the Silver Moon Lady made Soren a little nervous. After specially sending someone to inform Vivian not to provoke the goddess, he had the energy to do something else. After paying a small price, Soren finally collected some information about the Silver Moon Lady. God name, Silver Moon Lady, Surin. Other names, Our Silver Lady, Silver Moon Lady, Moon Maiden, Moon Goddess Divine System. None. Divinity, Intermediate Divine Power. Holy Emblem, a pair of female eyes surrounded by 7 silver stars. Residential area, Moon Gate. Alignment, Chaotic Good. Clergy, Moon Navigation Exploration Star Wanderer Good and Neutral War Creatures. Domain, Moon Chaotic Good Star Protection Travel War Creature Exploration Female Lactation etc. Believers, Female Spellcasters Good and Neutral War Creatures, Navigators Monks Sailors etc. Clergy Alignment, Neutral Good Chaotic Neutral. Preferred Weapon, Waning Moon Staff Heavy Hammer. This was the divine template that Soren summed up from various sources of information. It was clear that the core clergy and domain of the Silver Moon Lady was the moon. After collecting this information, he quickly realized the conflict between the god of hunting and the Silver Moon Lady. Thus moon domain and the war creatures, believers. The unusual movements of the knight in silver and the recent actions of the Silver Moon Church seemed to have a deeper meaning. In the current situation of falling to the mortal world and losing most of her divine power, the Silver Moon Lady naturally needed to restore her power. However, the Avatar Crisis was also an excellent opportunity for the Silver Moon Lady who had always wanted to return to the greater divine power. If the Avatar Crisis did not break out, it would be quite difficult to kill another god. Even if they were only gods with weak divine power, they would have to pay a great price to kill them. Therefore, when the Lady of Silver Moon was at her weakest, it was almost impossible for her to regain the power that once belonged to her. But now that the Avatar Crisis had broken out, if the Lady of Silver Moon killed the enemies who had taken away her domain, then she would have a great chance to take back this power. Soren couldn't remember who killed the god of hunting. When the Avatar Crisis broke out, many gods had fallen. The rows of thrones in the Pantheon Temple were not empty. To be serious, Soren did not know many gods. Unless there was an obvious intersection with him, Soren would not deliberately remember these things. However, now the situation was like an arrow on the bow. The hunting priesthood was of great significance to Soren. Even if the Lady of Silvermoon intervened, he had to fight for it. Only by getting the hunting priesthood could Soren enter the greater divine power realm. Otherwise, relying only on the priesthoods like the half-elf and the rogue, the lesser divine power, was already his limit. And if he missed the turbulent period of the Avatar crisis, it was basically difficult to cross into the intermediate divine power realm. The Queen of Spiders, who could go all the way from minor divine power, banished, to greater divine power, now, was a special case after all. Princess Royal could not leave Arendelle. However, for a spellcaster at her level, space no longer limited her distance. As long as Soren needed a space beacon, she could directly teleport to any place in the material plane. The Holy Avenger was still in the hands of the Paladins. Soren had to bear the backlash of its power. He could only borrow it when the battle broke out. The most important thing now was to locate the body of the god of the hunt, Malor. As a god of the evil alignment, he was still very cunning. At present, he had not exposed the specific location of his body. Soren once again returned to his disguised identity. Next, he would sneak into the Church of the Hunt as a high-grade hunter and judge the location of the god of the hunt according to the bloody sacrificial ceremony. He had fallen to the mortal world. In the process of the bloody sacrificial ceremony, the body would have a connection with the ceremony at the divine level. Unless the god of the hunt did not want the power of the sacrificial ceremony, Soren could always find him. Mordor City. Secret Laboratory. Saruman came to this huge laboratory in a grey wizard's robe. As one of the few wizards in Mordor City, he finally proved his value and loyalty to Sir Soren and Sir Gloria after spending such a long time. After signing a more complicated contract involving the soul level, Saruman finally entered the senior circle of Mordor City. Actually, the main reason was that high-grade spellcasters were too rare. Saruman's attainments in alchemy were very good, and he had been promoted to a high-grade wizard. After discussion, Gloria and Fallen which decided to let him know something. Naturally, the matter of the shadow plane could not be easily exposed. However, this high-grade adept could be of great help when it came to creating golem statues. After spending a lot of experimental research, the two witches finally began to assemble the diamond golems. Soren had a special hobby of making weapons. Soren glanced at the other party. His strength was probably around the advanced level, which was very suitable for his plan. He immediately said, "There are 5 of them. They are very strong." "Only 5 people?" The elven captain's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this. He said in a deep voice, "Gather people immediately. Call back the sentry post too. Bring explosive arrows. Let's go and destroy these damn Malor believers." The elven patrol team had a configuration of 30 to 60 people. The elven captain in front of him directly gathered 27 people. With such an obvious advantage in numbers, he was confident enough to pay a small price to destroy the hunters. Most of the elven guards were profession level 5 or above. However, they were well equipped, and with their talent in archery, it was easy for them to gain an advantage in small to medium-sized battles. On the road, the elven captain was very alert and asked about Soren's origin. He was probably afraid of falling into a trap, but Soren had already done his homework and answered flawlessly. As they got closer to the valley, the elven captain quickly found the traces of 5 hunters. After confirming that there were only 5 enemies, he was obviously relieved. He immediately ordered the others to spread out and surround them, preparing to destroy these damn hunters. However, just as they were about to try and destroy the enemies, the elf who told them everything at the beginning disappeared. Chapter 636. Swoosh. A sharp arrow flew out from the darkness and instantly hit the werewolf among the hunters. Following the elven captain's attack, the other scattered elven patrol guards also stood out, holding their longbows and instantly suppressing the enemy with suppressive fire. The elf patrol guards had amazing fighting power in small-scale conflicts. They were all advanced professions that could fight both close and long range. The leader of the hunters was obviously a werewolf, so the elf patrol guards shot the most arrows at it. In an instant, the werewolf's body was full of sharp arrows. It was hit by 7 arrows in a round of attack. If it were other creatures, they would have died. However, it was a member of the dark species. As a dark creature similar to vampires, the werewolf's life was too tenacious. Even with so many arrows in its body, it could still transform and launch a surprise attack. "Enemy? It's the damn elves." The ogre let out an angry roar and rushed over with his heavy bone crusher hammer. Behind him were 2 orc hunters. They were very smart. After noticing that there was something wrong with the number of enemies, they knew to immediately break through to the side. Don't let any of them go. The elf captain's face was full of excitement. With such an obvious advantage in numbers, the scales of victory were almost completely tilted towards them. As long as they got rid of the werewolf, the other hunters would not be able to escape. Explosive arrows. Ready. Special arrows were taken out. These were explosive arrows made with alchemy. The price of one was 20 kindler. It was a sharp weapon for adventurers to kill high-level monsters. The value of this thing was higher than gold of the same weight, so even the entire elf patrol guards were equipped with less than 5 of them. It was a strategic sniper weapon. The power of the explosive arrows was equivalent to a small fireball explosion. A concentrated shot could directly kill a high-grade profession. Rumble. A dull explosion sounded. The werewolf was the first to be affected by the explosion. Its whole figure flew out. Its black fur was dripping with blood, but even if it was blown out of shape, the werewolf did not lose its fighting power. After letting out a low roar, it still had the ability to break out. Damn it. Don't let it escape. The elf captain pulled out the exquisite rapier at his waist, looked around and said in a deep voice, "Follow me and stop him." Once they entered the forest, their bows and arrows were basically useless. There were too many things that obstructed their vision, and the werewolves could easily use the trees to dodge arrows. It would not be easy to chase them in the wilderness. Shrill screams could be heard. The first hunter to die was a gnoll. In the face of more than 5 times the number of enemies, it was shot into a beehive. The victory of the battle belonged to the elven patrol guards. However, what they wanted was a great victory, a battle where they could wipe out all the hunters, so they began to disperse and surround them, preventing any enemies from escaping the valley. The second one to die was the orc hunter. When it realized that it was impossible to break through the encirclement, it suddenly went berserk and killed 3 elven guards. The werewolf was heavily injured, the ogre was heavily injured, and there was only 1 half-beast left. Just when the elven patrol thought that none of the hunters would be able to escape, a sharp arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness. One of the elven patrol guards was instantly killed. A second arrow came from the darkness, and another elven guard fell to the ground, clutching his chest. There are more enemies. Is it a trap? The elf captain suddenly had a bad feeling, but he quickly realized that the enemy's shooting speed was not fast. This meant that the number of reinforcements was very small, and they could still win by relying on their advantage in numbers. There. A shout was heard, followed by the voices of others. "There's only one enemy. A few of you, come with me and take care of him." Soren's figure appeared at the edge of the battlefield. When the elf vice-captain saw that Soren was alone, he immediately rushed over with his guards. Soren was now dressed like a hunter. He looked like a human, but his body was filled with a wild aura. When he noticed that someone was approaching, he immediately put an arrow on his bow and aimed at the elf vice-captain. Swoosh! A sharp arrow pierced through the air. The human in front of him had incredible shooting skills. With a painful scream, the elf vice-captain fell to the ground and died. On the other side, the heavily injured werewolf was getting weaker and weaker. Under the siege of 3 to 5 elven warriors, it was about to enter a state of near death. When Soren's figure appeared, the werewolf's eyes shone with a glimmer of hope. It suddenly sped up and ran toward Soren's position. At this moment, Soren put an arrow on his bow again. He aimed at the elven warriors that were chasing after the werewolf, but at this moment, his expression showed a trace of hesitation. He suddenly turned his bow and shot at one of the elven guards that was attacking the ogre. The werewolf's scream before it died echoed. Soren expressionlessly turned around and rushed down. He pulled out the sword at his waist and prepared to save the orc and ogre that were being surrounded. The casualties were almost done. As the leader of this hunter squad, the werewolf was now dead. Soren actually had the ability to save it, but if it died, it would be more beneficial for his next plan. There were only 2 hunters left. They would be the key to Soren's mission to hunt down the church, so these 2 targets must not die. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Soren finished off the elf warrior in front of him with a single slash. Chapter 637. The 3 figures disappeared into the dense forest. In fact, there were traces of blood left by the hunters on the ground. These elven patrol guards also had rangers who were proficient in tracking, so it wasn't difficult to catch up with them by following the blood and footprints. But the damned human hunter seemed to have turned around and looked at them before he left. His eyes seemed to be telling them that if they caught up with him, more people would die. The hunter's shooting skills were too amazing. He could shoot at high speed and while moving, and even the elves couldn't raise their heads. Damned hunter. The elven captain pulled out the arrow from his shoulder and angrily hit the tree next to him with his fist. Since Soren saved the other hunters, the elves naturally thought that he was also a hunter. At the same time, the two surviving hunters also thought so. The reputation of the Church of Hunting was very bad. The gods of the chaotic evil alignment were all like this. Except for a very small number of believers, the rest of the gods maintained a neutral or hostile relationship with the hunters. How are the casualties? The elven captain let his companion next to him bandage his wound, and then his face turned ugly. How many people did we lose? An old ranger came over and said with a dignified face, 7 dead, 6 injured. We killed 3 hunters. We found these on their bodies. It seems to be a special token. Damn it. The elven captain angrily hit the tree next to him again. If the human hunter didn't appear, they could kill all these hunters. It didn't matter even if there were some casualties. But now 2 of them escaped and their own casualties were so serious. Hatred, anger, and guilt made him feel uneasy. What about the elf? I don't know. Maybe he ran away during the battle? Captain, do you think this is a trap? It shouldn't be. The elf didn't lie. Even if it is a trap, there can't be only one enemy support. Did you find any footprints of him leaving? Yes. He left towards the south. South? Isn't that the direction where the hunters escaped? He couldn't have chased after them alone, right? I don't know. Captain, what do we do now? Get someone to send the message in the token. These hunters have been getting more and more rampant recently. I'm going to write a letter to ask the Elven Court to send a ranger to support us. Is it a windrunner? The voice sounded excited. I don't know. Clean up the battlefield. Go back and strengthen your defenses. We can't let these hunters mess around in our territory anymore. The Elven patrol quickly left. However, about 10 minutes later, a vigorous figure appeared nearby. It was a high-grade rogue. Judging from his appearance, he was an elf. On his chest was a rare emblem that looked like a meteor with a long tail. This emblem was rarely seen in the human world because it represented the god of thieves and elves, Erfin. After a long period of time, the power of the priesthood had been distributed many times. In particular, the domain power of many gods involved each other, which led to some gods holding the same or similar priesthood power. The god of thieves and elves, Erfin was a lesser divine power god. He was a member of the elven divine system. There was not much information about him, but he was often called the naughty clown. His core was the priesthood of thief and prankster. His domain included chaos, elves, luck, and craftiness. He was a god of a race. His belief was limited to the elves, and most of it was spread among bards and thieves, so the outside world did not know much about him. At this moment, the elf rogue walked around the battlefield, then left a mark here and then left in another direction. Because the god he believed in controlled the luck domain. Therefore, it was said that the believers of the elven god of dexterity and thieves, Erfin, would be blessed by luck. Very few creatures from the outside world believed in him, but he was still quite influential among the elves. Believers who were favored by this god would get extra luck bonuses. What an annoying hunter. About half an hour later, another elf appeared here. She looked normal, but after seeing the mark left on the ground, the female elf shook her head with dissatisfaction and murmured, I can't let them interfere with the plan of the Queen of Gods. I must let the Queen of Gods attack these guys. Otherwise, we can't determine the whereabouts of Erfin. There was no doubt. This was not a real surface elf. She was a drow disguised as a surface elf. The web of conspiracy of the Queen of Spiders had begun long ago, and the elven divine system that the Queen of Spiders hated the most was undoubtedly the elven divine system that had once exiled her. There were quite a few members of the elven divine system. Even the Queen of Spiders did not dare to rashly start a war, so she targeted the weaker gods among them. The god of elves' dexterity and thieves, Erfin, had reached the level of intermediate divine power at her peak, but as the shadow domain fell to others, this deity fell back to a lesser divine power. However, relying on a luck, crafty, and thieves' domain power, this god was still the backbone of the elven divine system. The reason why the Queen of Spiders targeted him was very simple. Crafty. This was one of the core domains of the Queen of Spiders. Killing this god could greatly increase her power and allow the Queen of Spiders to further master the powerful, crafty domain. Basically, there was a very obvious characteristic of the battle between the gods. That was, many of the gods who were at war either had conflicts in their domains of divinity or were the same or similar in their domains of divinity. The same domain of divinity was a potential opponent. Defeating these opponents could not only reduce the number of competitors, but also improve one's own strength. The female elf quickly left. But before leaving, she used a spell to send a message. She believed that this message would soon be sent to the Underdark. On the other side, after using a little trick, Soren successfully mixed into the ranks of the hunters. As for whether he was a follower of the god of the hunt, Malor, these guys in front of him could not tell. What he had to do next was to prepare a bloody sacrifice and then attract the attention of the god of the hunt. Chapter 638. The Hunter's Camp. When Soren came here, he clearly felt a few hostile eyes, but when the other party saw the emblem he was wearing, a blood-stained beast claw, the hostility of the other party was obviously reduced a lot. At this time, Soren looked like a hunter in the wilderness. His face was rough and strong, and his body had a very fierce and wild aura. The belief of the god of the hunt, Malor, was also spread among the humans, but it was limited to the evil hunters. Other than that, only a few humans would choose to believe in the god of the hunt. Londeko, a burly half-orc, appeared in front of Soren and the others. He stood with a trace of blood on his body. After glancing at Soren coldly, he asked, "Why are only the two of you back? Who is this human?" Londeko was the ogre hunter. He glanced at the half-orc in front of him, who seemed to be the leader, and said in a dull voice, "We were attacked by the elven patrol. Everyone else is dead. This is Soros, a hunter from near the misty forest, and a companion who serves our lord. If it wasn't for his help, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to come back." Soros? The burly half-orc glanced at Soren, and his expression became a lot gentler. Then he said, "Okay. You guys come in first. There's something important to discuss later." The church of the god of the hunt, Malor, was very narrow. Not only were the areas scattered, but also the races were mixed. This was his greatest drawback. The church that served Soren had a strict internal order. Basically, the priests and core members of the church were very clear about it. But the church of the god of the hunt couldn't do this. Therefore he spread his faith across races, and the church was more scattered in small groups. Now, even if they were gathered together, there was no way for the hunters to completely recognize each other. Even because of the desire for legendary blood, even if you were not a follower of the god of the hunt in the past, as long as you could offer a legendary sacrifice, the god of the hunt would even be willing to accept you as a follower and give you a trace of divine power as a reward. Evil god could only give two kinds of gifts. One was power. Very few gods would bestow divinity. Most of them would bestow a sliver of divine power. This sliver of divine power was already very powerful for mortals. The second was wealth. Money was nothing to the gods, and most of the evil gods were very generous in this regard. There were about 10 people in the camp. Soren also saw the body of a dead male elf with the emblem of the queen of the forest, Marikai. It was a unicorn with a golden horn and blue eyes. She was a member of the natural god system, a powerful god in the neutral and good camp. The unicorn goddess was her mount in battle. The queen of the forest was also an enemy of the god of hunting. However, the natural god system also had an obvious characteristic, that was, the church was quite scattered. This goddess didn't even have a proper temple. Her followers mostly prayed in the sacred forest or other altars. However, she had a large number of rangers as her followers. This was because her clergy was the goddess of the forest and rangers. Marikai was a humorous and kind god. She always had a confident smile on her face. She was very cautious about making friends, but once she recognized them as her friends, she would protect them passionately and loyally. Although she understood that death was also a part of the cycle of life, she was not as cold as the oak tree father. Instead, she often intervened to heal the pain of creatures out of sympathy. Her incarnation was often a beautiful woman with brown hair and brown eyes. She had a strong and elegant body and wore a set of green and brown leather armor. The church of the Queen of the Forest was very concerned about the wilderness. In such areas, the rangers were often the only line of defense against danger. Many people thought that her priests were far more willing to find the balance between the development of civilization and the protection of nature than the elves hiding in the forest. In addition, her church was also seen as an indispensable force against the fierce and cruel Malor followers. The queen of the forest had a very good relationship with the god of travel and the god of light, and worked hard to fight against the evil gods, especially the god of hunting, Malor, the lord of storms, and the lady of poison. This is. Soren pretended to be surprised and said slowly, a follower of the queen of the forest? The burly half-orc glanced at Soren and said calmly, yes. This ranger wants to spy on our camp. But my lord is in charge of tracking, so he is just a prey to us. Your name is Soros? Looks like you have some skills. Very good. We are preparing an important plan, and maybe your power can help us to complete it more easily. Soren nodded expressionlessly. It seemed that choosing the god of hunting, Malor, as his target was the right choice. First, he was evil enough, and second, he had enough enemies. Killing other gods could easily anger the gods they belonged to, or cause the gods they were on good terms with to hate them. But the god of hunting, Malor, was different. He had many enemies but not many allies. The consequences of killing him were minimal, and it was even possible to gain the favor of some of the good gods. However, after learning more about the god of hunting, Malor, Soren became more and more afraid of his strength. There were so many enemies, but he was still alive. In terms of combat power, he might be stronger than he thought. The god of hunting, often represented high combat power. Night fell. A group of hunters quickly gathered around the campfire. The half-orc in the lead glanced at the others and said in a deep voice, my lord needs to offer more prey. This is the oracle that he has sent to us. Only the blood of legends can satisfy our master, so we must hunt down an enemy of sufficient strength. Here. The burly half-orc took out a simple map, then pointed his black finger at a place in the south of the forest and said in a deep voice, there is the prey we need here. A holy unicorn. A beast blessed by the unicorn goddess. This will be a very challenging hunt for us. But if we succeed, I believe that everyone here will be rewarded by my lord. Blood of the unicorn. My lord was very satisfied with the unicorn we offered last time. I believe that everyone knows its benefits, and soon there will be more forces to help us. We are going to do something big this time. Chapter 639. The combat power of the hunters was very strong. Perhaps it was because of their faith that hunting was a very common part of their lives, which gave them far more combat experience than other professions. If a simpler analogy was used, it would be that many of the hunters were elites, which made them much more difficult to deal with compared to ordinary professions. It seemed that the followers of the clergy related to the slaughter category were quite difficult to deal with. The god of massacre was like this, and the god of murder was like this later on. Even the followers of the god of hunting were just as strong. It seemed that the Church of Hunting was now in a state of being surrounded by enemies, but under Soren's observation, they were not at a disadvantage because of this. First of all, the hunters were used to moving around in the wilderness, which made it difficult for many enemies to find their tracks. Even if someone found their tracks facing the followers of Malor who had mastered the tracking clergy, the end result was undoubtedly the same as the ranger who believed in the queen of the forest, becoming prey in the eyes of the hunters. The losses of the hunters were not small, but it was not as great as imagined. Judging from the size and traces of the camp, Soren found that after the camp was built, they had lost more than 10 people. In comparison, the losses of the other churches were likely to be even greater. This was something to be wary of. That was when he really went deep into the enemy's camp to spy. Soren found a very serious matter. The average strength of the members of the Church of Hunting was quite high. There were basically no hunters whose strength was below grade 3, and their average profession level was above 10. If they were to add their own biological talents, their strength would be much stronger. In contrast, the strength of Soren's church was uneven. The middle and high-grade church members were obviously not as strong as the veteran Church of Hunting that had been developing for a long time. Take this camp as an example. There was actually a half-legendary orc and 5 high-grade hunters. But these were not the key points. What really made Soren ponder was whether the hunting clergy was like the killing clergy, which had the ability to rapidly increase one's strength. It was mentioned before. On the spiritual level, it could increase the proportion of soul energy absorbed after killing the enemy. This increase in slaughter EXP was about 5% to 25%. The reason why the Church of Hunting had so many middle-grade and high-grade followers was probably related to the power of the clergy. The next day, when Soren got up, he noticed that the body of the elven ranger who worshipped the queen of the forest was gone. Instead, there was a horrifying skull in the hands of the orc leader. This was a special ritual of the hunters. The belief of the orcs was that they could seize the enemy's power. After killing a powerful enemy, they could absorb a part of their power into themselves. Such a ritual would be carried out differently depending on the race. Ogres and gnolls believed that only by eating their enemies or digging out their hearts could they gain the power of their enemies. Some werewolves believed that they should eat their enemies' hearts, and some believed that howling to the moon after a hunt could awaken the ancient power in their bodies. This kind of ritual was common among hunters, so many of these hunters had a rich collection. Note: in the area of ancient shamanism, many tribes believed that through certain rituals, they could obtain the power of the enemy they killed. The hunters moved out the next afternoon. This time, a total of 13 hunters were dispatched. If Soren was included, it would be exactly 14 people. Among them, the strongest was the orc leader, whose profession level should be between 18 and 20. Next were 5 hunters with a profession level of 15 to 18, and the rest were basically masters with a profession level of 12 or above. Their target was the unicorns. Unicorns were one of the favorite prey of the god of hunting, Malur. Unicorns were rarely seen in the material plane. Only in the depths of the elven forest could one be lucky enough to see these powerful and beautiful creatures. Unicorns in the material plane were not very strong. Because some of them had been crossbred with Pegasi and horses, their bloodlines were mixed and they had lost their original template of a heavenly creature. That was how the wildebeest was born. However, even an ordinary wildebeest was around level 3 to 6. The pure-blooded unicorns were generally level 15 and above, and with the template of a heavenly creature, they would be level 20 and above. Adding the word holy, they would have to raise the challenge level by 1 to 3. Their protector was the unicorn goddess, Rui. The hatred between the god of hunting and the unicorn goddess had been going on for a long time. The relationship between them was probably much more intense than most forests. The unicorn goddess loved to wander around. As a god of the chaotic camp, her character was also somewhat capricious. However, once she thought that the other party was trustworthy, she would show a loyal friendship and would never abandon her believers in trouble. This was very similar to the queen of the forest. When she had to face a battle, Rui would be a very difficult enemy. However, what she liked most was all kinds of relaxed banter, clever puzzles, novel discoveries, and all kinds of joyful exploration in life. This goddess was more casual in her private life, perhaps because her body was a divine unicorn. Rui's church did not have any formal clergy system, nor any temples or altars built in her name. Although some races such as unicorns, Pegasi, and the intelligent owls worshipped her as the guardian goddess of their race, most of her believers were abandoned people who were awakened due to their own unique abilities, such as the Enlightenment spell recipients. Note: the Enlightenment spell can grant wisdom to animals. There was a passage that recorded this goddess. Rui's church holds an all-night celebration every year, filled with all kinds of wild banter and noise. There are many wild riding competitions in the countryside or across the sky, as well as all kinds of exaggerated skits, witty speeches, satirical debates, and romantic confessions. Many unicorns also choose to mate and reproduce that night, and the believers have their own joy. Occasionally, the incarnation of the goddess will appear in such a celebration. The unicorn goddess's hatred for the god of hunting, Malur, was very strong. She strongly condemned the king of beasts' crime of assisting the Red Robe Sorcerers Association to create black evil unicorns. Although the Red Robe Sorcerers had long disappeared in the long river of history, there were still some black evil unicorns left in the plain. In contrast, the god of hunting, Malur, was also happy to taste the blood of the unicorn goddess. He had always regarded her as another target worth hunting. At night, a group of hunters gradually approached the inner part of the elven forest. The hatred between the god of hunting and the unicorn goddess had lasted for thousands of years, so the believers of the church were eager to hunt down the unicorns. The hunters' plan was very thorough. They would sneak into the forest at midnight, complete the hunt, and quickly leave. They had already scouted the surrounding terrain, so even if the nearby elves reacted, the hunting ritual would have already been over. Soren did not want this to happen. Therefore, he believed that although the hunt would be successful, the elves would still discover them. It would be best if more than half of the hunters died here. Chapter 640. Under the quiet night sky. Everything was quiet. The cold moonlight shone in the depths of this beautiful forest, and a clear lake could be seen in front of them. Under the moonlight, the water looked like a crystal, as if it contained some kind of dreamy power. In the legends of the elves, it was said that there was a water spirit living in this lake, but very few people could see her. However, it was undeniable that there was a power shrouding this place. In the darkness, some strong figures were lurking around. The hunters had brilliant tracking and sneaking skills. They waited patiently near the lake, waiting for their prey to appear. Water. This was a place that most wild creatures couldn't leave. There was a trace of life energy in this lake. So many nearby creatures liked to replenish their water here. A pitch-black cheetah appeared by the lake. The hunters didn't make the slightest move. Although this was also a good prey with the strength close to the high grade, they weren't looking for this kind of trash today. As believers of the god of hunting, they were very clear about the habits of unicorns. It was said that the unicorn goddess was the daughter of the Silver Moon Lady, but there was no basis for it. The relationship between the two gods was not very close. The closest ally of the unicorn goddess was the queen of the forest. Her relationship with the Silver Moon Lady could only be said to be friendly. If the Silver Moon Lady gave birth to a daughter, it shouldn't be a divine unicorn, so there must be some relationship between the two, but in fact, it shouldn't be the identity of mother and daughter. It was interesting to say. The enemies of the god of hunting, Malor, almost all had a close relationship. The queen of the forest, the unicorn goddess, the Silver Moon Lady, and so on. Most of his enemies were close allies. This was also why Soren didn't dare to act rashly and attack other weak gods, because he might accidentally provoke a very powerful enemy. Unicorns had a habit. They liked to wander in the forest under the quiet night, especially when there was moonlight, so the probability of them appearing today was very high. Hunting required patience. Although many of these hunters were from the chaotic camp, they were quite patient. They lurked nearby and didn't move, scattered and surrounded the lake. However, they didn't notice that one of them had left a little. The night was getting darker. Suddenly, a sparkling light appeared in the forest in the distance. Then, a majestic unicorn with a pale golden horn appeared in their line of sight. It had snow-white fur and looked like a creature that had walked out of a dream. The cold moonlight shone on its body and seemed to reflect a faint glow, illuminating everything around it. A divine unicorn. To be able to be crowned with the name, Holy, it was naturally related to God in this world. It was a creature favored by the unicorn goddess. Not only did it have a trace of power given by God, but Soren also felt divinity in it. This was a divine creature. The hunters hiding in the darkness couldn't help but look at the unicorn with burning eyes. The unicorn in front of them still didn't feel the approaching danger. It leisurely strolled along the lakeside, enjoying the tranquility and serenity of the night. It retained the bloodline of a heavenly realm creature, so the light on its body was actually a symbol of power. The characteristics of a heavenly realm creature were still in effect on its body. The unicorn slowly came to the lakeside. It leisurely lowered its head to drink. Suddenly it seemed to feel something. It raised its head and looked around vigilantly, but it didn't see anything in the darkness. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Arrows were shot from all directions. These +2 arrows hit the target in an instant, leaving wounds on the beautiful fur of the unicorn. Drops of blood dripped down. The unicorn let out a roar full of anger and panic. At this time, a metal net suddenly fell from the sky and covered it in place. Success. Hearing the excited roars of the other hunters, 5 figures rushed out in an instant and shouted, "We've trapped it! Everyone do it! Kill it and we'll leave immediately!" A dazzling explosion of light. For a moment the surroundings were as bright as day. The sudden burst of light directly blinded many people. The long pale golden horn on the unicorn's head emitted a faint glow, and waves of magic waves gathered. Piercing shot. The hunter's second round of shooting came in an instant. The unicorn, which was temporarily trapped, had no room to dodge. All of a sudden, its magic was forcibly interrupted, and its injuries became more and more serious. The result of the battle was almost doomed. Facing the siege of more than a dozen hunters, even if this holy unicorn had legendary strength, there was no possibility of survival. After all, it was just an intelligent beast. But, just when the hunters felt that their prey was about to die, suddenly, a vigorous figure appeared under the moonlight. Their bodies seemed to be surrounded by the power of the wind, approaching at a high speed in a low-altitude glide. One jump was dozens of meters away. Soon they were close to the quiet lake that was destroyed by blood and slaughter. Wind chasers. Another ranger unit of the elven race had the strength not weaker than the knights in silver. Swoosh. A rain of arrows came, and in the blink of an eye, 2 hunters fell to the ground. Kill the unicorn first. The burly orc leader was shocked and angry. He didn't know why his plan failed and was suddenly discovered by these elves. It was as if they had received the news long ago. The holy unicorn was seriously injured. In this case, the most important thing was to complete the mission at all costs. In the darkness, a sharp arrow flew out, ending the life of this divine unicorn, as well as the pain it was enduring. Chapter 641. I'm sick. Sorry. Soren's figure was hidden in the night. With his powerful stealth ability, even if these wind chasers were the elite elves, it was unlikely that they would find his trace in the night. The hunters who stayed behind had suffered heavy casualties. The few survivors saw that the situation was not right and fled in other directions. Soren also began to attack in the night, tracking the traces of the hunters, and directly killing these guys secretly. These enemies should not go back alive. The more the enemy's strength could be weakened, the more advantageous it would be for his later plan. At dawn, Soren rushed back to the hunters' camp. This time, 14 people went to the mission and only 4 people returned. A total of 10 hunters with a profession level of high grade and above died. Even a god's church could not afford such casualties. It was equivalent to all the high-grade officers of a fleet of Mordor being killed. Although the hunters succeeded in killing a holy unicorn, the nearby hunters were basically hit hard and lost the ability to fight head-on with the elven rangers. When Soren returned to the camp in the form of a hunter, there was still a trace of blood on his body. It looked like he had been through a difficult battle. Nearly half of the people inside were gone, but they did not seem to be sad. On the contrary, they seemed quite excited. Because the sacrificial ceremony to the god of the hunt was about to be held. The god of the hunt was a very generous god. In his history, he had never been stingy with giving enough rewards to his believers. Whether it was wealth or power, as long as the ceremony succeeded in pleasing him, they could get rich rewards. The evil gods were similar in this regard. In the Underdark, if a drow matriarch succeeded in pleasing the Queen of Spiders once, the status of the whole family would be improved, and the family would be prosperous for a long time. The sacrificial ceremony soon began. The god of hunting did not have many temples because his followers were often active in the wilderness. Therefore, a simple altar was enough to offer sacrifices to his prey. The body of the holy unicorn was carried up. Now this beautiful legendary creature had become a cold corpse, and drops of blood were sprinkled along the altar. The orc leader in charge of the sacrificial ceremony. He was chanting the prayer of the Church of the Hunt, ready to call Maelor's avatar to appear. A faint light appeared. A very powerful aura appeared on the altar, and then some kind of power formed an illusory figure that looked like a huge mutant baboon. The god of hunting had noticed this and quickly formed an avatar on the altar. It was ready to feast on the prey offered by its followers. The 2 gnoll hunters carried the unicorn's corpse up to the altar. A perfect sacrifice should have been to offer up the prey and then kill it on the spot, but this was definitely not enough. The figure of the god of the hunt, Maelor, moved slightly. On the corpse of the holy unicorn, a faint blood-red radiance, invisible to the naked eye, emerged. This radiance gradually poured into the phantom of the god of the hunt, but it seemed to be quite rare. The burly half-orc leader continued to chant the prayer. The whole ceremony would take a long time, because this was still a sacrificial offering. However, at this moment the shadow of Maelor, the god of the hunt, suddenly let out an angry roar. A telepathic ripple transmitted his words. "How dare you fool me?" The god of the hunt, Maelor, seemed to feel that he had been fooled. His mood became very irritable and full of anger. He suddenly waved his sharp claws and roared, grabbing the half-orc leader in front of him. Then white brain matter mixed with blood splattered. The half-orc with near-legendary strength died just like that. The blood-red radiance continued to appear, but this time it appeared from the corpse of the half-orc leader. This power temporarily calmed his anger and allowed his distorted body to gradually recover. The sacrificial ceremony was interrupted. The phantom of the god of the hunt, Maelor, roared angrily. He who had satisfied his thirst for blood, did not continue to kill. He looked at the followers around the altar, watched their frightened eyes and then slowly disappeared. Everyone stood rooted to the ground. The other hunters looked at the 3 corpses on the altar in a daze. One was the half-orc leader, and the other 2 were the gnolls who carried the unicorn up. They were killed in an instant. These hunters did not understand why the god they served suddenly became angry and killed the followers who were holding the sacrificial ceremony. The entire sacrificial ceremony ended in failure. Whether it was the god of the hunt, Mailer, or the hunters who held the sacrificial ceremony, they did not get what they wanted. This was because there was something missing from the offerings they had offered. The god of the hunt's anger was very simple. After his avatar appeared on the altar, he made a loss. The prey offered by the followers could not make up for the divine power he consumed, let alone restore his power. This seemingly powerful prey had actually lost its value. Apart from a little power contained in the flesh, he did not get anything. In short, the reason why the god of the hunt was so angry was, where did the divinity go? Of course, the divinity was with Soren. This divine unicorn provided him with 2 points of divinity, as well as over 200,000 slaughter exp. As the son of slaughter, Soren almost absorbed the soul and divine energy of any enemy he fought. The hunters only offered Mailer the shell of a unicorn. This sacrifice was not even comparable to an ordinary unicorn. Soren's figure had already disappeared among the hunters under the altar. All of a sudden, a sharp arrow shot out from the dense forest, followed by the figures of the elven rangers. They rushed towards the hunters who were still in a state of confusion. They were ready to kill all these damned enemies in one fell swoop. It did not matter who led the elves to the hunters' camp. Soren felt a very strange power during the sacrificial ceremony just now. This power was very similar to his identity as the son of slaughter, and it also made him vaguely guess something. In history, the son of slaughter's strength increased very quickly because they could absorb the power of the enemies they killed. Soren felt a trace of power similar to his own from Mailer, who had just mastered the hunting clergy, but there was also a big difference. Mailer could also absorb soul energy, although the way he absorbed it was not the same. But one thing was certain. This was definitely a gift from the hunting clergy, which made it easier for him to absorb soul energy and divine energy. Chapter 642. A failed sacrificial ritual. Soren finally determined the approximate location of the god of the hunt, Mailer. He also confirmed that the god of the hunt, who had just fallen from the divine kingdom, had lost a lot of power. Otherwise, he would not have killed his own followers because of a failed sacrificial ritual. Judging from the last scene, the god of the hunt should have taken the orc leader who was in charge of the ritual as a prey, and then made up for the divine power consumed by his avatar. With the outbreak of the avatar crisis, it had become extremely difficult for many gods to receive faith and divine power. Soren had a great temple as a relay, but Mailer could only rely on his avatar to absorb power because of his own reasons. Today's gods were similar in this regard. If Soren's followers were not praying in the temple or near the city of Mordor, then the power of faith he could absorb was very limited. The avatar crisis affected all aspects of the god's abilities. In the past, if someone mentioned the name of a god, then within 24 hours, some powerful gods could directly see the person who mentioned the name in the situation nearby if they wanted to. This was a bit like the gods. Although the gods could not easily appear in the mortal world, they could easily know many things in the mortal world. But now it was not possible. The power of divinity had been greatly weakened, and many gods could only maintain the most basic ability. Any power of divinity that used to be very easy to use now required a lot of divine power. This situation would continue until the end of the avatar crisis. Now, no matter who it was, all gods needed to rely on their saint form to perceive the outside world. Even if there were believers in Mordor calling Soren, he could not feel or notice anything. The real body of the god of the hunt, Mailer, was in the deepest part of the wilderness. It seemed that he was also a smart guy. He knew that he had many enemies, and his saint form did not dare to get too close to the area of human activity. He was probably afraid of encountering other gods who had fallen into the mortal world. Soren was ready to find out. If he could determine where Mailer's real body was, then he should consider how to kill him. Frostleaf City. This was a city near the north. Not far from it was the ruins of Silvermoon City, a city that was once very old and glorious. The Northern Witches originated from Silvermoon City Sorcerer Organization. Now this once glorious city had been buried by history, leaving only some ancient ruins in the depths of the earth. The powerful magic lock had also been moved to the tower by the Northern Witch Council. Now only Frostleaf City was still thriving nearby. Under the cold moonlight, a petite figure sat on the roof, staring blankly at the moon in the sky. She had a pair of furry cat ears, and the tail on her little but was moving as if she was bored. At this time, there were no pedestrians on the street, but there were many guards below the mansion she was in. They were all experts, and at a glance, One could tell that they were the kind of guys who had been through hundreds of battles. The power of Mordor City had extended to many places. Because Vivian planned to incorporate the Church of Fear, Soren sent out many of his elites. Now, most of Mordor City's energy was on Vivian's side. The Fear cultists were already very weak. This was one of their few strongholds, and now it had become the hidden power of Mordor City. Meow. Lulu shaved her claws in boredom, looked at the moon in the sky and murmured, "It's so boring here. Mordor City is still fun. So many fish. Meow. I can swim in the sea and catch fish every day. How free." As a beastkin. Although Lulu had a good status in Mordor City, she had no friends around her. She rejected the approach of others. Except for some of the highest people in Mordor City such as Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch and so on, she was only a little familiar with the High Priest of the temple. Beastkin were a group of people who were very adapted to being alone. Maybe they had been used to it for a long time. Nowadays the number of beastkin was getting fewer and fewer. A cat-type beastkin like Lulu could only be seen in the Eastern Kingdom. Most of the time, Lulu was a little follower behind Vivian. She was an optimistic cat girl who was easily satisfied. A simple life in Mordor City could make her feel satisfied. This may be caused by her childhood experience. The survival of beastkin had always been difficult. When she first saw Soren, she was being sent to the south coast in a cage by the slave ship. Life outside Mordor City was boring. At least Lulu thought so. Master was busy incorporating those fear cultists and had no time to play with her. Fighting was also boring. As Vivian's personal maid, Lulu had only fought once or twice so far. Although she wanted to tell others that she could fight more than them, in fact, there were still few opportunities for her to fight. Master was getting more and more powerful. Many powerful guys in Mordor City were sent here. The outside world was not the same as she imagined. What she saw was not wonderful but a difficult life. The longer she left Mordor City, the more she missed that place. In the dark alley in the distance, there was a group of refugees. They heard that the lizard men were attacking humans over there, and now many people were running here with their families. War, chaos, hunger. In Lulu's simple understanding, the outside world seemed to be full of these things. A breeze blew by. Just when Lulu turned her head in boredom, she suddenly saw a beautiful woman walking in the moonlight. The moonlight sprinkled on her body as if there was an illusion. Lulu actually saw a little silver-white halo on her body. It was a beautiful woman. Words couldn't describe it. Her body was full of an aura that made Lulu feel close, and even made her feel a trace of motherly warmth. Child. The beautiful woman walking in the moonlight suddenly appeared beside Lulu. It was an unusually intimate aura. The other party's touch made Lulu curl up involuntarily, as if she wanted to get closer to her. No one had ever made her feel so close. She had always been very repulsed by humans, and there were only a few people who could make her feel close to them. This beautiful woman in front of her had a more gentle aura than Gloria, who used the enlightenment spell on her. It even made Lulu put down all her guard. She raised her little head and glanced at the other party and said, "I'm looking at the moon." There was a faint smile on the beautiful woman's face, and there seemed to be a trace of joy. She said slowly, "Do you like the moon?" Lulu nodded and said, "I like it. I like it very much." Meow. Whenever the moon is full, I feel the moonlight on my body so comfortable. She was a beastkin. Basically, all beastkin had some kind of mysterious connection with the moon. Lulu's talent was awakening, and the brilliance of the moon would awaken her potential at a specific time. The beautiful woman smiled as if she was a mother. She stroked Lulu's forehead and said, "My child, I'm very happy to see you again. Would you like to go with me? I want to leave here. If you want, you can go with me." Ah. When Lulu heard this, she suddenly woke up. She looked at the beautiful woman in front of her in a daze. Her cute little face showed a hint of hesitation and struggle. She didn't know why, but the other party made her feel very close, and she could feel that the other party would never hurt her. But when the other party proposed to leave with her, Lulu couldn't help but hesitate. Meow. The little cat girl thought for a long time, then raised her head and said seriously, "Meow. I'm afraid not. Although Lulu likes you very much. But Lulu already has a master. I can't leave the master and go with you. The master is in trouble now. She has a very, very powerful enemy. Although the master's brother is also very powerful. But the enemy is too powerful. Meow. Lulu wants to stay by her side. Help her defeat the enemy." "Oh. When I help the master defeat the enemy, I'll go play with you again, okay? Lulu likes you very much. The beautiful woman in front of her was stunned. Then she showed a gentle smile, reached out and stroked Lulu's long hair and smiled, okay. You're a good child. Since you don't want to leave with me, then I'll leave you a gift. My name is Suluan. I'm your protector. If you're in danger, you can call my name. The beautiful woman stretched out her white slender finger and tapped Lulu's forehead. Then there was a trace of silver-white holy light. Some kind of transcendental power of law turned into a blessing and stayed on the little cat girl. When Lulu came back to her senses, the beautiful woman had already left. Everything seemed to be a dream. P.S. I've been sick recently. Sorry. I hope everyone can understand. After all, the author is also a human. Sometimes I can't help when I'm sick. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.